This happened on New Year's. I was home alone for the holiday, having already spent Christmas with family, and didn't have anyone to go out with on New Year's night. So I just kicked it back at home, had a couple beers, and watched TV the whole night. I watched the whole Times Square celebration, then just turned on some older holiday movies. I wasn't all that tired, and around 2 a.m. I felt like getting up and doing something, since I'd been sitting on the couch pretty much all day. I checked out the windows. It was snowing a bit, but not too much, and I knew it was cold and dark out there, but a walk just sounded really nice. I grabbed my jacket and hat and gloves, and headed out to walk around the neighborhood. Right away, I noticed it was surprisingly quiet outside. Even though it was 2 a.m., I figured because of New Year's, there would be parties and whatever. Yet, all the houses only had their outdoor Christmas lights on, and no cars were driving through the streets. It was just calm and empty. Very peaceful, actually. I'm not even too sure how long I was out there for. Obviously, I wasn't fully sober, so time was hard to keep track of. And I was zigzagging through the neighborhood with no real direction or route in mind. Eventually, I made it to the park. It looked like the path hadn't been shoveled since that morning, but it only looked like maybe 2 inches of snow, so I just started walking down it anyway. Thought the slight change in scenery would keep the walk interesting. I walked a little ways in before realizing that not only was the snow actually getting harder to walk through, but there also weren't any lights on along the path. I'd walked it at night before, and it always had these small sort of street lamps lining the trail, but I guess they turned them off for the winter. So after a few minutes, I turned back around. I dragged my feet through the snow, walking maybe a minute back the way I came, when I saw something pretty weird. There was another set of tracks, going right along mine from just a few minutes ago. Someone had to have been walking right behind me, and honestly, it kind of looked like they had been following me, given that there were no shoe prints there before. But I didn't see anyone, and when I tried to see if they had turned around, or where they went, I found the tracks led off the trail, going out into the dark areas that I couldn't see anything in. For all I knew, there could have been someone standing just 10 feet in front of me, and I wouldn't have a clue, because it was pitch black. I quickened my pace to get out of there, but I still didn't fully think it was something to worry too much about. I admit it could have been me being tipsy and not realizing the strangeness and possible danger I was in, especially with the tracks going off the trail and leading straight into the darkness. At the time, I tried to assume it was just some really big coincidence. I got away from there and walked further into my neighborhood, not going directly home yet. I walked for 15 more minutes. Not that I was looking very hard, but I didn't see anyone else, so I thought by then I was all good. When I made it back home, I took all my winter stuff off and figured I'd take a shower and then hopefully be tired enough to get in bed. It wasn't until I was already halfway up the stairs that I realized how dark it was, and that the upstairs lights were off. This caught me off guard, because I'm the kind of person that leaves all the lights on all day. I hadn't even been upstairs since waking up in the morning, so I definitely left the lights on up there. I could see how this might sound like some small thing that I fixated on, but I think even if I were fully drunk, I'd still have known that those lights were left on. I cautiously walked the last few steps up to the hall and looked down, then flicked the light back on. I didn't really know what I was looking for though. I walked through and just peeked my head into each of the rooms, seeing if there was anything obvious. I made sure to close each of the doors after looking, which is why after checking the last room and turning back around, I felt my heart stop. The first door right by the stairs was wide open. To me, that 100% confirmed that someone was inside my house right now. After freezing up for a few seconds, I called out asking who was there. I was scared to move. They could have been right there in that room, or had snuck downstairs and really been anywhere at this point. I remember taking slow, careful, and quiet steps down the hall, feeling adrenaline and a sinking, awful feeling in my gut as I approached the doorway. And then I woke up. And no, this wasn't all a dream. I woke up laying on the floor in the middle of the hallway, head spinning and with a horrible migraine. I think only 10-ish minutes had passed between then and now, and it was apparent that I'd been attacked and knocked unconscious, with no recollection of anything but the moments leading up to whatever the hell happened. Even my vision was blurry and fading in and out. I called 911 right away. Whoever it was that broke in and attacked me was long gone, but I tried to give the police an account of everything I could remember. It still bothers me so much that a part of my memory was just blacked out like that. I likely came face to face with the guy, probably enough to get a good description of him. Hell, I might have even known exactly who it was. Yet, it's like my own head is hiding it from me. After that night, the updates were minimal, and nothing ever led to anything significant. I don't know who it was or what his intentions really were, but I wouldn't doubt it if he didn't even want me to wake up. I work at a local ski resort in a small mountain town as maintenance/security. All my job really was just cleaning and general maintenance stuff, but I was somewhat trained for security as well, because we'd had a few break-ins overnight to steal skiing and snowboarding gear, or to try using the slopes while we were closed. After the several instances, the company changed schedules around to have 2 people working overnight to do our regular work while also deterring any possible trespassers. We didn't have cameras or anything, so the security title of my position never really affected my day-to-day job, because after we started working overnights, we didn't have any more people try breaking in for months. The most we had was someone coming up to the door and trying to look inside, but aside from that, it was always quiet. Also, like I mentioned, I never worked alone on these overnight shifts, or at least technically not alone. My coworker Matthew was always scheduled for the same shift, but he worked on the opposite side of the resort. The resort was split into 2 large sections, with just a hallway connecting them. Sometimes I wouldn't even see Matthew for days or weeks at a time. So even though I wasn't, it really felt like I was working alone most nights. But this night had started out the same as usual. I clocked in and started cleaning up the main floor. The place gets really messy during the busy season, so even though it wasn't the hardest work, there definitely was a lot to do. The first hour went by pretty quick. I was still in the large main room when I heard what sounded like a tapping noise. Maybe someone tapping on a window. I set my things down and walked to the front where most of the windows were. I didn't see anything until I walked right up to one of the windows and noticed footprints right under it in the snow. They went right up to the glass, then went around to the other side of the building. Not too sure what to think about it, I threw my coat on and stepped outside to look around. I thought it might have been someone lost, and if it wasn't, then I had to tell them to leave. But as soon as I got out there, I saw the footprints go from the window to the parking lot, which was already plowed, so from there I had no idea where they went. It was pretty weird, but it was way too cold and dark to be walking around the whole perimeter. I went back inside. I got right back to work, hoping whoever that was wouldn't come up again. I want to say 30 minutes passed. By then, surely the snow had covered up any of the tracks outside, so even thinking about it wasn't worth my time anymore. That was until I heard a few doors open by the connecting hallway of the resort, and a few moments later, Matthew showed up. He looked distressed and kind of confused when he saw me. He immediately asked what I was doing. I looked around confused and just said I was working. Matthew nodded his head, acknowledging it, but almost as if that answer didn't make sense to him. "Is everything okay?" He said yeah, that he must have been tired or something, shaking his head. Before he left, I mentioned that I saw some footprints in the snow outside and asked if it was him. He shook his head no. I hoped that he would explain more about what he was so concerned about, now that I told him about the strange thing that I saw, assuming from the way he was acting that he had something strange happen too. But he didn't say anything else. He just left my section of the resort and went back to the other side. Now, me and Matthew weren't good friends or anything, just to be clear. Again, we rarely ever saw each other, so we weren't more than just acquaintances. He was also a lot older than me too, so when we did talk, it was always just work-related. I'm mentioning this to give context on why I didn't question him a little bit more, or go over to his side and really try to figure out what was going on. I kept working, but spent most of the next hour thinking about how strange of a night this was. And just when I thought the rest of the night would go by without any more occurrences, I heard a loud bang from the corridor between the resorts. Sounded like maybe a door slamming, or something heavy hitting a wall. It was enough to make me jump, and go looking to make sure Matthew was okay. I headed to the connecting corridor and didn't see anything, so I continued into the other section where Matthew was. Except he wasn't there. "Matthew? You good?" I called his name over and over, and got not even a sound in response. I started getting nervous, and as I made it to the back of that section, my stomach dropped when I saw the back door was wide open. Snow was blowing in, but it looked like the door had only been open for maybe a couple of minutes. I hurried over and looked outside. I didn't see anyone, but there were more footprints leading away from the building and heading up the resort toward where the ski lifts were. There was no reason Matthew should have been going out there, so this only made me even more nervous. I called out Matthew's name again, but the wind didn't carry my voice very far. I started getting worried, like really worried. I double-checked everywhere inside the building for him and didn't see anything. The only clue I had were the footprints in the snow. I ran back to my section and got my coat again, then hurried to the open door. I walked out and started to follow the footprints. They went way farther than I expected. It was also dead quiet outside, just wind and snow. No other signs of anyone being out there. The footprints led me all the way out to the bottom part of the ski lifts, and slightly up the shallow hill, and that's when I stopped. They led out of the resort area and into the trees that lined the hill. There were no lights or anything out there, and from my knowledge, it was just a regular mountain forest past that tree line. My heart started racing a little bit more, and I got the feeling these might have not been Matthew's footprints I was following. "Matthew, are you out there?" There were several long seconds of silence before, in the far back behind all the trees, I saw a figure move into view and look right at me. From what little I could see, it didn't look at all like Matthew. I ran as fast as I could back down the hill and into the resort, falling multiple times from my boots getting stuck in the heavy snow. Whoever was out there didn't follow, but I knew they were watching me. I closed the door and ran to the other side where the front desk was, using that phone to call the police. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I wasn't taking any more chances looking on my own. Of course, being up in the mountains, police were about a half hour away. I hid in the closet with all the rental gear for that whole time, listening to the winds outside and the eerie calmness inside the empty resort. It was 10-ish minutes into waiting that I heard what might have been a door opening on the other end of the resort, but I didn't dare even try to see for sure. I didn't hear anything after that until police made it. Disturbingly, they found another set of footprints going back up to the back door, so whoever that was out there had come back, maybe looking for me. And it only took about 30 minutes for the police to officially state Matthew as missing. Although from the police officers I talked to, they didn't see any signs of foul play inside the resort, which makes the officers think it was someone he knew that got Matthew to let him in, or led Matthew out. Either way, once the footprints made it to the woods, there was no way to track them any further. For a while, I'm pretty sure I was actually a suspect, being one of, if not the last person to see him, but eventually they were able to confirm I didn't have anything to do with it. The whole situation was really scary, and it's hard not to blame myself a little bit for how things went down. Feel like I should have done more somehow, but I also know that if I walked deeper into the forest to follow the footprints, or had tried to help any more, there's a chance I would be missing right now too. It was about 4 years ago during the holidays. I had driven out all the way to a small town in Montana where my parents lived to surprise them for Christmas. I stayed there for a whole week before heading back home. The drive was about 16 hours, which I never thought was too bad. I really didn't mind pulling over at rest stops and taking a nap for a few hours if I had to, and I always thought it was more worth it rather than stopping at a hotel or motel, mostly because it would make the trip take even longer. Anyway, I left in the afternoon, a few hours earlier than I planned to, because there was supposedly a big winter storm headed our way, so I hoped if I left early, I could get by before it started. Think it was somewhere around 4 or 5 hours in that the storm hit. The road went from pretty much empty and uneventful to suddenly snow everywhere within minutes. The wind was really bad as well, pushing my car around and throwing snow at my windshield. I didn't feel like I was losing control or anything though, and with no other cars on the road, I still felt safe driving. However, after an hour of this, it really started tiring me out, mostly from just having to pay so much attention to the road, and the snow started piling up on the road a bit more. My phone suddenly started beeping with a winter storm advisory, and only a couple minutes after that, I lost all service. It was definitely a lot worse than I was comfortable with now, especially because if something were to happen, I'd be stuck without any way to call for help. So I pulled off at the nearest rest stop a few miles down the road. It was an empty, quiet rest stop just in the trees off the highway, with a small, snow-covered parking lot and a service building. There was only a single other car parked on the other end of the lot. It looked like it had been there from before the storm though, because the roof had a thick layer of snow over top it. Few minutes after pulling in, the storm somehow got even worse. It was a whiteout. I couldn't even see the other car anymore, and the wind was actually pretty scary. I can't imagine anyone could have been driving in weather like this. A long, boring hour went by as I sat and waited in the snowstorm. Eventually, both out of boredom and uncomfort, I decided to get out and head inside the rest stop service building to use the bathroom. As soon as I stepped out, the freezing wind and icy snow was almost immediately painful. I hurried up to the building and got in. There was just a small lobby with a few benches, some pamphlets of road maps, and 2 doors leading to the restrooms. Thankfully, the heat seemed to be working in there, so I actually just stayed in the lobby for a minute and warmed up, while looking out the windows at the snow coming down. I could only faintly see the car still parked over there, now with the snow covering the entire windshield. Thought it was strange that it didn't look like it was on. I mean, it was below 0 degrees outside, so not having the heat on would have had them freezing by now. But after a minute, I headed up to the bathroom door and pushed it open. Or tried to. It opened just a crack before slamming back shut. I pushed it again, and that time it barely budged. I took a step back. It wasn't like the door was locked. It was like someone was on the other side, preventing me from opening it. I stared at the door for a second, really just shocked and unsure what to think about that. It was really strange. I thought about just going into the women's restroom instead, assuming if whoever that was in the men's restroom was the only other car at the rest stop, then it shouldn't matter. But honestly, I didn't feel safe being in there any longer. Felt like something wasn't right about this, or that there had to be a reason they were blocking the door like that, and I really did not want to push my luck. So I hurried back out of the building. As I left, I heard the bathroom door swing open, but I didn't turn back to look. I just continued walking through the storm and back into my car. By this point into the storm, the whole rest stop parking lot was covered in snow, and I really wasn't sure if I could even leave. I wanted to, even if to just drive a few miles down to a different place to pull off at, but I didn't want to get stuck trying to leave. So I sat there and tried to wait out the storm. I tried to think of any possible reasons for someone blocking the door like that, but honestly, I couldn't think of anything. Nothing that would explain them knowing I was walking in, and already being at the door to stop me from entering. Only a few minutes later, I noticed a shape start emerging from the whiteout, coming in between my car and the building. It was a person, and basically right when he became visible, he stopped walking and just stood right in the blizzard. He looked like he was on the phone talking to someone, and he was facing me. Couldn't tell if he was looking at me though. He paced around that same spot for a minute, still talking to someone on the phone, before he started to slowly make his way closer to my car. Like he would pace a few steps toward me, then stand in the same spot for a bit, trying to make it not obvious. But at one point, when he was much closer, I very clearly saw him looking directly into the car at me. And then, all of a sudden, he had this wide, over-exaggerated smile and started approaching my window. He walked right up to my car and tapped on the window, grinning at me through the glass. I was genuinely terrified, and as embarrassing as it is to say it, I was completely frozen in fear. Like for a moment, I just couldn't get myself to do anything. The man started knocking on the window a little harder, basically hitting it, hard enough that I was surprised it didn't shatter. And then, in the distance behind him, I saw another guy come out of the rest stop building and start running over. I snapped out of it and put my car in reverse. My heart sank when my tires started spinning out. I wasn't moving at all. The guy got closer and closer, until suddenly my car jolted back and got traction. I backed out and put it in drive, and in the split second before I drove off, the one man that just got there threw a knife right at the windshield. It bounced off, but put a huge crack right in the middle. I drove out of there and prayed that I didn't lose control or get stuck the whole way down the road. I was sure they would try to follow me, but as far as I know, they didn't. I drove dangerously through the storm until it started to clear up and I had service. It had been so long, though, that the police didn't find either of the men when they got there. But what they did find was the car. It was still right there in the middle of the parking lot, untouched. Despite what I had assumed, it wasn't either of the men's car. It belonged to some other guy that when the police showed me a reference photo, I didn't recognize. And over the next few days, it came out that the man was missing. No sign of him. From what I've heard, he was also on a road trip, and his family believes he pulled off the highway to sleep for the night. But then, he wasn't heard from or seen again. Honestly, I think something really terrible happened at that rest stop just before I arrived there. I think one of the men was outside keeping a lookout while on call with the other, letting him know to block the door when I walked in. Had I forced my way inside, I have a really bad feeling of what I might have found, and they probably wouldn't have let me get away either. It was last winter, and I was living alone in a small neighborhood home. It was one of those places where everything beyond the backyard turned into trees and undeveloped land. I'd lived there for about a year by then, and never really had any issues. It was quiet, which I liked, and even though it was on the older side, it still felt like a nice, cozy home. This happened over a long weekend, where it was snowing on and off, and extremely cold outside, often below zero, so I was at home and inside all day. This night, after eating dinner and cleaning up around the house, I watched TV for a bit and eventually turned everything off and went to bed around 11. One thing I have to mention about the bedroom is that for the last 3 or so months before this happened, the lock on my bedroom door had been broken. It was one of those push locks, and I just noticed one night that it didn't work. The door would still click open from both sides, but I had put it off for all that time because it just didn't seem important. I lived alone, so I didn't have family members or roommates that I was trying to keep out of my room. As long as all the main entrance doors were locked, my bedroom door really shouldn't matter. The hassle of buying a new one and changing it out just seemed really unnecessary. That being said, sometime later in the night, I woke up suddenly. My heart was beating quickly for some reason, and although the house was pitch black and quiet, I could faintly see that my bedroom door was cracked open. I could feel the alarms going off in my head, but at the same time, I knew there was a chance the door just didn't close properly and happened to make its way open. Maybe the cold winds slightly shifting the house caused it. I got out of bed and walked over, not wanting to turn the lights on, hoping I could just close it and get back to sleep. I shut it and double-checked it was latched in the doorway, then got back in bed. But as I laid there, I could tell something in me wasn't satisfied, like my gut knew there was more to this. I kept opening my eyes and looking around the room, although seeing nothing but shadows filling every corner. I probably stubbornly laid there, hoping to pass out eventually, for 30 minutes, before something moved in the house. I heard it, like a shuffle on the floorboards, either downstairs or in the hall outside my room. I leaned my body up and tried to listen, but there wasn't anything else. I was frozen, sitting up in my bed and not making a sound for a while. I was worried that if I got up and moved, then I wouldn't hear it again, or wouldn't be able to determine what it was. And eventually, I continued listening, but laid back down. I waited and listened for a long time, and don't even remember falling asleep. Didn't realize it until I woke up suddenly again, heart beating quickly just like before. And when my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw the same thing. My bedroom door was cracked open. I laid there staring at the gap in the doorway, looking at the darkness beyond it. Obviously, the hallway light was off, so it was just a deeper black outside of my room. I tried to tell myself it must have been the house again, or that maybe it didn't latch the way I thought it did. But that explanation didn't sit right this time, because I was very aware of how intentionally I closed it last time I got up. I started to get out of bed to walk over there again, but just as I swung my legs out of the covers, something shifted behind the door frame, like someone had moved out of the darkness between the crack in the doorway. I froze up again. I didn't hear anything though. No footsteps walking away. Nothing. Just the wind making the house creak. I didn't know if whoever the hell was right outside that door was still there, or if they were watching me, or what they were going to do. I stood motionless and quiet for 5 whole minutes, but it felt like hours, before I quickly ran to the door and slammed it closed, pressing all of my body weight into it to keep them out. But he didn't try to push it back open. There were maybe 15 seconds of silence, and then I heard soft, dull footsteps slowly move down the hallway and down the stairs. Sounded like he went toward the back door, and then it was quiet again. I quickly called the police, and thankfully I can say nothing else happened during the 10-ish minutes I waited for the police to make it and search the house. They took down a lengthy report of the whole night and everything I knew, which wasn't much, and they searched the home, but found nothing. However, as we were standing in the kitchen talking about what happened, I glanced toward the back door, explaining that's where I last heard his footsteps moving toward, and I saw him again. His silhouette, standing in the trees behind my backyard. He moved away quickly before the officers could look. He was probably standing out there watching us through the windows from afar, which is insanely creepy and unsettling. I spent that night at a friend's house, as well as the next few days. Over the few weeks afterward, I didn't really get any more news from the police, but the snow cleared up a bit, and I found some even more unsettling things in the back forest behind my home. There were these faint and rugged trails through the woods, like from someone having walked the same way over and over, and the trail led right up to the back of my house. Whoever this guy was, he'd been stalking me for a while, long enough to have even naturally made a footpath in the forest. And probably the most disturbing find was that the way he broke in was likely through one of the back windows, which I found didn't lock correctly. Kinda like my bedroom door. Could just be a coincidence, but seeing as he'd been stalking me for a while, there's a chance that that night wasn't the first time he was in my house. And the broken lock on my bedroom door might have not been some random unrelated occurrence either. Needless to say, I moved out and far away from there. I just really hope I wasn't followed. I know right now as I'm writing this, it's the middle of winter, but this actually happened a few months ago on Halloween. I wasn't sure if I wanted to share this, but after debating it for a while, I decided I might as well, just in case it helps someone else not fall for the same situation I did. I live in a really old apartment building on the outskirts of town, which wasn't necessarily a bad area, but it was definitely far from being nice. It was where most who couldn't afford to live in the city end up settling down at, since all the houses and buildings were built in the early 1900s, so they were cheap. My apartment had been renovated a few times, but overall it was still noticeably in bad shape. A ton of the people living in the other units moved out in just the last couple of years, and all the rooms were left vacant. I don't think whoever owned the building ever tried to rent out the rooms. Maybe they wanted people to move out. I don't know. They just left the empty rooms there, and after a while, I genuinely think I was the only one still living in that building. It felt like every time I walked in or out through the halls, I never heard a single sound, or saw anyone at all. It was just an empty, forgotten building that somehow I was the only one still living in. I distinctly remember a month or so before this event, I had tossed some stuff in the dryer before walking out of the building to head to work, and down all 3 stories of the building, I could hear my dryer rumbling through the walls, filling the silence in the staircase and the hallways. That's how quiet and vacant it was. Anyway, I worked on Halloween, and being older and living in an apartment, there wasn't much for me to celebrate. So I tossed my work stuff on the floor and just sat on the couch to maybe watch a horror movie, or pull up a Halloween-themed video on YouTube. It was around 9 p.m. when the sudden knock at the door to my unit nearly had me paralyzed from how much it startled me. 3 loud knocks, and then it was just quiet. And they were definitely at my door. I got up, still shaken and confused that not only was this the first I'd heard of anyone being in the building for months, but also that they were at my door. I walked over and cracked the door open, and was even more confused. There was a kid. She was wearing a Halloween costume and holding up a bag. I must have stared at her for a whole 10 seconds, frozen and trying to figure out what the hell was going on. The girl didn't say anything either. She just stood there, looking at me through her mask. The bag she held up was empty, no candy in it, and I felt bad that I didn't have any to hand out, but I was more focused on figuring out where she even came from. "How did you get in here? Do your parents live in this building?" She didn't speak, didn't really seem fazed by the question either, honestly had no emotion. I leaned my head into the hallway and looked down past the girl. No one else was out there. No parents, no other kids. It was dead silent in the whole building. I was about to ask another question, but she suddenly turned away and walked down the hall to the staircase, and left. I stood there for a minute, hearing her go down the stairs and seemingly out of the building. Didn't knock on any other doors or stop at any rooms. Something was really strange about that. I closed and locked my door behind me, but I felt like I needed answers. All these months of not hearing or seeing a single person or sign that anyone else was in this building, and then suddenly one night a girl shows up at my door. It just didn't seem right. I spent a few minutes trying to look out the windows at the parking lot in front of the building, but my car was the only one there, just like it always was, and no one else was outside. It was dark and vacant. After a few more minutes of thinking about it, I threw on my jacket and decided to head out to look around. I went into the hallway, stopping to listen for a moment, then walked down to the staircase. As I walked downstairs, the building seemed just as dead as usual. No signs of anyone else on any of the other floors. When I got down to the bottom, I looked outside from the front door. The girl was definitely gone now, and there was no one near the building whatsoever. I know it was Halloween, but this kinda had me legitimately creeped out. And as I was closing the front door, I noticed something else. The keypad next to the door had a blinking light. Now, this was just one of those old keypads with the buzzers that I guess used to work, but since I'd been there, it wasn't functional. I always used my physical key, and even if you press the buttons on the keypad, it wouldn't light up or show any signs that it was working. I assumed it was completely disconnected. So seeing the light suddenly on and blinking was pretty strange. I closed the door and tested to see if it locked, thinking maybe the blinking light meant the door wasn't locking properly. But it seemed to lock just as usual, so I started heading back up to my unit. I didn't like the feeling of being outside of my room, not with the strange things going on this night. I walked up past the first floor, and then the second, but stopped in my tracks as I passed the hallway. I backed up and looked down it, confirming what I saw out the corner of my eye. One of the unit doors was open. That had just happened during the couple minutes between me walking downstairs and coming back up. "Hello?" My voice echoed down the hall, and there was not a sound in response. A chill hit my body, and I quickly hurried up to my room, getting in and closing the door behind me. I felt like my whole body went into panic mode for a second. I took a deep breath and started to walk into the living room, before sudden loud knocks hit the door behind me. I hadn't even been inside for 10 seconds. I called out hello again as I stared at the door. The person knocked again, but didn't say anything. I quietly walked up to the other side of the door, and I looked out the peephole. I saw a man. He had full black clothing and a hood draped over his face. He hit the door again and stood right up to the door, like he was pressing on it, so that as soon as I turned the handle, the door would fly open. I took a few steps back, and suddenly I heard something else. Footsteps from the outside hallway. There was more than one. I heard them start whispering, but all I could hear were low mumbles through the thin walls. I could feel that whatever this was wasn't over. I got my phone and dialed 911, then tried to find a place to hide. It was just a one-bedroom, tiny apartment, so my options weren't great. I decided to go out onto the balcony, which had blinds covering it. And not a minute later, there was a slight thump inside the building, and then I saw light slowly shine into the room as the door creaked open. I was looking through the small cracks between the blinds. Two men walked in and started looking around. My heart was racing. They were inside for a while, even coming right up near the blinds to the balcony, but eventually left. I waited out there in the cold for 10 minutes before cops got there. No one else was inside the building, and from the investigation, I did find out that I was the only one living in the building still, at least legally. No one else should have had access aside from the owner. But I didn't get many answers as to what was really going on. It felt like the men had used the little girl to condition me to open the door, so that when they knocked, I wouldn't think twice and would just open the door. I moved out in the following days, and it seemed like after moving away, everything died out. The police stopped giving any updates, and the whole situation faded into nothing. I don't know what those men wanted from me, or what was really going on in that building, and I'm thankful I didn't have to find out that night. I used to work the night shift at a small shipping warehouse right outside of town. It wasn't a big place, just a long concrete building with 3 loading docks, a tiny office, and endless rows of metal shelving. Most nights, it was only me and 1 or 2 other guys, but the company cut hours during the slow season, so for a few weeks, I was completely alone from midnight to 6 a.m. I didn't think much of it at first. I guess the peace and quiet was nice, and the job was easy enough. I kept my earbuds in most of the night and tried to not think about how quiet it was. Heavy machines that ran all day were silent at night, so even the smallest noise echoed. This night in particular was very quiet. No cars driving on the highway outside or even wind hitting the building. From inside, I could hear the soft sound of crickets in the forest that was just beside the building, because there was nothing to drown out the noise. At some point early in my shift, I put my earbuds in and worked for a good while without stopping. I was in the far back corner, scanning a pallet, when I heard something that made me stop. Footsteps. Light ones. Not hurried or heavy, but almost definitely footsteps. They came from the front of the warehouse, near the office. At first, I thought my boss might have stopped by without texting me, which has happened before, and gave me as good of a scare as you'd imagine. I took my earbuds out and listened again, but now there was nothing. After a minute, I told myself I imagined it, but then just as I started getting back to work, I heard them again. Just a few footsteps, slow and spaced out, like whoever it was wasn't sure where they were going. "John? That you?" I called out my boss's name, but he didn't call back, and the footsteps seemed to stop too. I walked toward the front, trying to act like I wasn't nervous. The warehouse lights didn't reach the office area that well, leaving that part of the building dim and shadowy. I flipped on the office light and checked inside. I even checked the break room, and found nothing. Didn't know what else to do, other than shake it off and get back to work. Usually, I didn't get worked up about stuff like this, so I knew either tonight I was just feeling off, or something was actually off about the warehouse. Another hour went by, and I'd finished scanning what I needed to, and headed back to the office to log everything and check on a couple of things. Like I said before, the office was kind of in the back corner of the building. I sat down and started doing all the boring computer work of just clicking through things and adjusting the numbers from the scans. I was in there no more than 5 minutes, when for some reason I looked up at the hallway window, the one that overlooked the warehouse floor. Someone was walking between the shelving rows. Just a silhouette, barely visible, but I felt like even from the quick half look I saw, the movement was clearly someone walking. I stood up so fast the chair tipped over, and I shouted hey at them to try to get them to stop. My voice resonated down the warehouse, but after they disappeared out of view behind the shelf, I didn't see anything. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find to defend myself, some old metal tool from the desk, and stepped outside the office. I started slowly walking down, and I kept calling out something along the lines of, "Who's here?" and "You can't be in here," over and over. No matter how hard I tried to fake it, my voice didn't sound confident at all. I moved aisle by aisle, checking corners and even looking behind boxes where a grown adult couldn't possibly be hiding, and yet I still found no one. Eventually, I made it to the far back wall, and every row behind me was empty. I sort of stared at the warehouse with this blank stare, trying to understand this. The only other place I could look were the couple side hallways that I guess if it really was a person I saw, they could have snuck into, but I felt like I would have heard the heavy metal doors opening and closing. But there was no way I'd be able to get back to work without checking. I opened one of the doors and looked down. This area I hadn't really been to. I think it led to all the manager's offices and stuff like that I had no business ever being in. I didn't see anyone though, so I turned around and let the door start closing behind me. And just when I did, I heard the sound of a door opening from down the corridor. I quickly spun around and grabbed the door before it shut, looking down the hall again. There was a man now, standing right at the end of the corridor. He looked early 20s, but not like the normal young guy you usually see. He looked disheveled and crazy, eyes wide open enough for me to see them from all the way down at the other end of the hall. I don't know if he was on something or what, but it was horrifying and disturbing the way he looked at me. I called out, asking what he was here for, and telling him he needed to go. The guy didn't even look like he comprehended what I said. I called out again, trying to sound more aggressive, and mentioning that I'd called security, which was a lie, but I hoped it would work. He started taking a few steps forward. I couldn't tell if he was complying with me or just trying to close the distance, so I just stood in the doorway trying to talk to him still. Think it was when he was about 15 to 20 feet away that I noticed something in his hand, and by the time I looked back up at his eyes, he lifted his arm and hurled it at me, chucked it with all of his strength, sending it flying right at my head, only missing me by a couple of inches and hitting the door frame beside me. It was a hammer or a large metal wrench. The harsh metal echo it made when it hit the door frame felt like it burst my eardrums. I immediately turned and booked it out of there, hearing the guy chase me like his life depended on it. I looked over my shoulder a couple times, seeing him still just 10 to 15 feet behind me, with that horrifying look in his eyes. I made it to the office and locked myself in, hearing him slam his body into the metal door and try opening it. Luckily, this office was solid, only having that metal door and the window, which was the super sturdy kind. Like maybe 4 inches thick of heavy-duty glass that isn't supposed to shatter in a rough work environment. The guy moved around to the window and started ravagely slamming his shoulder into it and punching it. He looked absolutely insane, but he eventually realized he couldn't break in and turned around and just walked away, slowly making his way down to the other end of the building and I'm assuming out the back door. I was already using the office phone to contact the police by this point, but it took forever for them to get to the warehouse, so the guy really could have been anywhere by this point. This wasn't some fancy new warehouse either, so the cameras were awful. It showed us the guy breaking into one of the doors and walking around, almost stalking me during my whole shift, but there were no clear views of his face to identify him with. Wasn't any way to know why he broke in or was trying to attack me either. I stayed at that job for a while afterward, and the event almost started to not even feel real because of how crazy it was. Eventually, though, I did leave and get a similar gig somewhere else, figuring it wasn't worth hanging around with the chance the guy could come back looking for me.
This happened a few nights after Christmas, 2 years ago during a snowstorm. I was 18, still in high school and working evenings at a GameStop in a strip mall in the Midwest. It was my first retail job, and because it was the holiday season, they'd have been scheduling people later than usual. That night was supposed to be easy. The weather was bad enough that we hadn't been busy at all. Snow started in the afternoon and just kept coming. By the time it got dark, the parking lot was already covered and most of the stores around us had already closed or were barely getting customers. Normally, there were 2 of us closing, but my coworker left around 9:30. He always got picked up because he didn't drive yet. They were strict about that, especially in bad weather. He asked me if I'd be okay for the last half hour, and I said yes because I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle it. We closed at 10. By 9:40, everything was basically dead. I locked one of the 2 front doors like we were supposed to and left the other unlocked until close. I started straightening shelves and counting drawers, doing everything slowly to kill time. I remember checking my phone and seeing messages from friends complaining about being snowed in. I was annoyed more than anything. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. At 9:55 or around then, the door opened. The bell rang, loud and sharp in the quiet store. A guy walked in. He looked like he was in his early 20s, but it was hard to tell because he didn't take care of himself at all. His hair was greasy and stuck out from under a hood. His jacket was dirty, like it hadn't been washed in a long time, if ever, and it was unzipped, even though it was freezing outside. His jeans were stiff and stained, and his shoes were soaked through. He smelled bad. Not just like somebody who needed a shower. It was worse than that. He didn't look at me right away. He just stood there for a second, staring at the floor, breathing through his mouth. I said, "Hey, just letting you know, we close in a few minutes." I tried to keep my voice normal, friendly even, the way we're trained. He looked up slowly and stared at me in a way that made my skin crawl. Just empty, like he was looking through me, or past me. "That's fine," he said. He started walking around the store, touching things without really looking at them, picking up game cases and putting them back in the wrong spots, running his fingers along the Funko Pop boxes like he was counting them. I stayed behind the counter and kept counting cash, pretending everything was normal. You get weird people in retail. That's just how it is. I told myself not to overreact. He stepped in front of the used game section and asked me how old I was. The question hit me wrong immediately, but I replied, 18. He nodded slowly, like he was following that information away. "You go to school around here?" he asked. "No," I said. That was a lie. I didn't even think about it though, it just came out. He gave me a little smile and it looked forced. I told him again that we were closing and asked if he needed help finding anything. I was hoping he'd just grab something and leave. Instead, he walked closer to the counter, like way too close. "I need you to come with me," he said. I laughed because sometimes laughing makes things less awkward. "I can't. I'm working," I said. He leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. I wasn't asking. Then he reached into his jacket. At first, my brain tried to make it something normal. A wallet, a phone, anything but what it was. But he pulled out a gun. He didn't point it at me right away. He just held it low, near his stomach, angled so I could see it clearly. "If you don't come with me," he said, "just calm and flat. I'm going to have to do something very bad to you, and I don't want to do that, okay? So just listen." Everything in my body went cold. I couldn't feel my hands. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He raised the gun a little, just enough to make sure I understood. "Don't scream," he said. "Don't do anything stupid." I remember thinking about my parents, about how mad they'd be if they knew I was closing alone, about how stupid it was that I agreed to do it, and about how the snow meant nobody was around. Then the front door opened again. The bell rang, and an older man walked in. Big guy with a pretty heavy hunting-style camo coat, slicked-back gray hair, and a huge beard. Glasses fogged from the cold. He didn't look confused or surprised. He looked focused, like he already knew something was wrong. The guy with the gun froze, and the older man took one look at him and said, firmly, "Put it down." The younger guy started yelling immediately, swearing, shaking, and waving the gun around like he didn't know what to do with it anymore. "Back off," he screamed. "This doesn't involve you." The older man didn't raise his voice. "Son," he said, "don't make me do this." That's when I noticed the older man had a gun too. He hadn't pulled it all the way out, but I could see it on his hip and was seconds away from drawing it out. It was steady. His hand wasn't shaking at all. The younger guy's confidence disappeared instantly. He started crying, like actual crying. saying he didn't mean it, saying he just needs help, and saying that he wasn't going to hurt anyone. The older man kept talking to him like he was a kid, telling him to breathe and telling him to put the gun on the floor. After what felt like forever, the younger guy slowly set it down. The old man kicked it away and looked at me. "Go to the back," he said. "Call 911 now." My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the phone twice before I could dial. It took the police maybe about 20 minutes to get there. They took the guy away in handcuffs, and he didn't even fight. He just looked small. Everything calmed down. The older man stayed until my parents arrived. He told the police he'd seen the guy earlier when he came to pick up his grandson from the GameStop next door, my coworker. He said the guy had been standing outside in the snow, watching people go in and out, lingering around. He said something about him felt wrong, so he stayed nearby. When he heard screaming, he came in. I quit that job the very next day and called my boss. He was sad about it, but understood it. I still think about how close it came. If he hadn't trusted his gut, I don't know what would have happened. This happened in the mid-2000s in my hometown in Wisconsin. I'd been at my sister's place for dinner, and I stayed longer than I meant to because my brother-in-law kept saying, "It's fine, it's not that bad." Like repeating it would change the weather. By the time I left, the snow had turned into a real blizzard. Not pretty snow. Not the kind you take pictures of. It was that whiteout where your headlights just light up a wall of moving white, and you feel like you're driving inside a shaken-up snow globe. I had a travel mug of coffee in the cup holder that was already cold. My windshield kept fogging up no matter what I did. I had the defroster blasting, but the edges of the windshield were still filmed over, and every time I wiped it with my sleeve, it made it worse. My wipers were struggling, making that heavy, slow scrape sound like they were tired too. I should have stayed. I know that now, but I had work early the next morning, and I didn't want to sleep on their couch and have to dig my car out at 5 a.m. It felt better to just go home and deal with it. Roads were empty, which should have been a clue. Usually, even in snow, you'll see a couple cars out. That night, it felt like I was the only person dumb enough to be driving. The storm made everything weird. Signs would appear and disappear. The reflective paint on the road was buried, so you were mostly guessing where the lanes were based on the vague darker lines where tires had gone earlier. The wind would shove the car sideways every once in a while, and you'd correct, and then you'd correct again. It was exhausting. I kept telling myself the same thing. Just keep it steady and don't slam the brakes, and don't get stuck. My phone was just a basic flip phone. No GPS, no maps, and I wasn't calling anyone. Even if I wanted to. I didn't want to take my hands off the wheel. I had both hands on it like an old person. At some point, I got off the main highway because I thought the back route would be faster. That was my second mistake. The main road at least had occasional plows. The side roads were just white. Nothing but frickin' snow and darkness. Trees started lining the road on both sides, and the wind pushed snow off the branches in bursts. Every time that happened, it looked like something moved into the corner of your vision. I kept flinching like an idiot. My shoulders were tight. My hands were cramping from gripping the wheel. Then I saw hazard lights ahead. At first, it was just two orange blinks, dull and half hidden by the snow. I slowed down right away. My brain went, okay, someone's stuck, or somebody spun out. In a storm like that, it happens, you know? You see it all the time. As I get closer, I realized the car wasn't in a ditch. It was across the road, not parked on the shoulder. Literally sideways, blocking both lanes, like it had spun and stopped right there. The hazards were on, but something felt weird. I pulled up and stopped a good distance back because I didn't trust the road. My tires slid a little when I hit the brakes, and that made my stomach drop. I put the car in park and just sat there for a second, watching the hazard lights blink through the blowing snow. My first thought was, I can't get around this. My second thought was, I shouldn't get out. But then I saw movement near the blocked car. Somebody on the driver's side, hunched down like they were checking something. I rolled my window down a crack. Cold air hit my face immediately. It felt like needles. "Hey," I yelled. "Are you okay?" The wind stole half of it. I wasn't even sure my voice carried. The person stood up and turned toward me. A guy, hood up, hands down by his sides. He started walking towards my car. Slow. Not limping, not waving his arms. Just walking right down the middle of the road like he wasn't worried about slipping. Like he owned that stretch of road. That's when the hazard lights bothered me more. They weren't blinking in a normal rhythm. One seemed to half beat off. Made the whole thing feel wrong. Like the car wasn't actually in distress, like it was staged. I told myself that was a stupid thing to think. People's lights break, cold messes with electronics, whatever. The guy reached my headlights, and I could see him better. Mid-20s maybe. Not dressed for the weather. That was the first real red flag. His coat was thin. His jeans looked dry. And his shoes looked clean. Clean shoes in a blizzard is a weird thing to notice, but I noticed it. because my boots were soaked just from walking from my sister's porch to my car earlier. I'd stepped in snow once and my pant legs were wet. This guy looked like he hadn't stepped in anything. He stopped at my driver's window and leaned down slightly. "Hey," he said. His face was pale and he had that red chapped look around his nose like he'd been out in the cold. But his breathing didn't match it. He wasn't panting and he wasn't shivering. He looked completely calm. "You alright?" I asked. It came out shaky, which annoyed me because I was trying to sound normal. "Car's stuck," he said, and nodded back toward the sideways car. "Can you give me a ride?" That was fast. He didn't ask for a push. He didn't ask if I had a shovel. He went straight to give me a ride, like that was the plan. "To where?" I asked. He glanced down the road behind me like he was checking something. Then he looked back at me and said, "Just up the road. There's a house." "What house?" I said. He didn't answer that. He just leaned closer like he wanted me to unlock the door. "Come on," he said. "It's freezing." It was freezing. That part was true. But something about him didn't fit. If his car had spun out, he should have looked stressed, angry, embarrassed, cold, literally anything. Instead, he looked ready. Everything was moving way too fast for this to feel normal. I kept my hand on the lock button without thinking. I didn't open the door. "I can call somebody for you," I said. "No service," he said immediately. That was another thing. He said it way too fast, like he'd already rehearsed it. Also, I didn't know if there was service or not because I hadn't tried, but I didn't like him deciding the options for me. I glanced past him at the car blocking the road. "Are you out here alone?" I asked. He stared at me for a second. "Yeah," he said. "Just me." He didn't look back, didn't even glance at it, like he didn't care what was happening behind him. "It's just me," he said. And then he smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was like he was waiting to see if that would work. I looked past him through the snow at the sideways car, and I tried to look inside it. The windshield was frosted over, but the inside looks dark. Then I noticed something else that made my stomach flip. The car's engine was running. You could see the exhaust coming out in a steady stream. If they were stuck and waiting for help, keeping the engine on made sense. But the car was parked sideways across the road like a barricade. If you wanted help, why block the entire road? Why not pull to the shoulder, even if you slid? I didn't say any of that out loud. I just sat there in my seat, trying to figure out what to do without making him angry. "I can't give you a ride," I said. He didn't change expression right away, just stared at me. "Yes, you can," he said, quietly. I felt my heart start hitting hard. The heater was blowing on my feet and I still felt cold. "I'm not comfortable," I said. That sounded stupid, like I was turning him down for a dance. He lifted his hands, palms out, feigning calm. "Don't be like that," he said. "I just need a ride." I shook my head. He stepped closer to the window and I smelled cigarette smoke. "Open the door," he said. "No." He looked past me into my car like he was checking if anyone was in the passenger seat. Then he looked back at me and his face went flat. He turned and started walking back toward the blocked car. For a half second, I felt stupid. Like I just refused somebody who genuinely needed help, like I was the paranoid one. Then he lifted his arm and I saw him make a small motion with his hand. Like a signal. That's when I saw it. A shape stepped out from the snow on the passenger side of the blocked car. I hadn't seen anyone there before because the storm was cutting visibility down to nothing. The second person started walking toward me. That feeling of hopelessness hit me then. The one where your body decides before your brain does. I threw my car into reverse. My tires spun. The car didn't move at first. I felt my stomach drop so hard, it was like missing a step on the stairs. I hit the gas again, harder than I should have. The car jerked back, sliding sideways a little bit. My rear end fishtailed and I thought it might spin out. I kept reversing anyway, eyes wide, barely able to see. Snow hit the windshield so hard it looked like sand. My wipers couldn't keep up. I glanced forward and saw the first guy turn around. He saw me backing up and his calm vanished. He started running toward my car. That was the moment I knew it wasn't help. I reversed faster. The road behind me was just white and I was basically guessing. I could feel the car sliding and correcting itself. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't keep the wheel steady. I heard something hit my car. A loud thud against the side. The second guy was closer now. I don't know when he'd moved. I just hadn't noticed until he stepped into view. He was taller and wearing darker clothes. He moved like he wasn't worried about slipping either. My reverse lights lit up the snow behind me and all I could see was white and two faint tire lines. I backed up until I felt my tires drop off the edge of the road into the shallow ditch. The car lurched and tilted. For a second, I thought I was stuck. Then the tires caught somehow, and the car bounced back up just enough that I could straighten out. I slammed it into drive. The wheels spun again. The car moved forward but sideways at the same time, like it didn't know what it wanted to do. I turned the car down the road away from them, and I just went. Not fast because the road wouldn't allow it, but faster than I should have been going in a whiteout. I didn't look back for a while because I couldn't risk it. I just drove until the car was gone behind me and the snow swallowed the hazard lights. I kept going until I hit a stretch where there were lights. Not a town really, just a couple of street lights and a gas station sign glowing through the snow like a mirage. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there shaking, hands still clenched on the wheel like I couldn't let it go. I tried calling my sister. No signal though. Tried again and still not working. I went inside the gas station and I'm sure I looked insane. The guy behind the counter asked if I was okay and I said, "Somebody tried to stop me on the road." That was all I could get out without sounding like I wasn't making it up. He nodded like he'd heard something like that before, which didn't make me feel better. I stayed there until the storm eased up enough that a plow came through and traffic started moving again. I didn't drive back that way. I took whatever main road I could find and added almost an hour to my trip. I made it home close to 3 in the morning. I didn't sleep much. The next day, I kept thinking about the clean shoes. That's the part that sticks in my head. I don't know why. It's just the thing my brain grabbed onto. If I hadn't noticed it, I might have opened the door. I might have let him in to warm up or call somebody. I might have ended up stranded, kidnapped, or dead. I never found out who they were or what they wanted. I didn't even go looking for news about it because I didn't want to read about something and convince myself it was connected. This happened a few winters ago during a snowstorm that ended up being worse than anyone expected. I was in my mid-20s at the time and living alone in a small house in Bum Nowhere, Pennsylvania. My wife was out of town for work and I'd planned to just stay in, shovel in the morning, and deal with it then. The snow started mid-afternoon. By early evening, it was coming down steady, thick flakes that stuck right away. I remember going out once around 6 to clear the porch and the first few feet of the walkway, thinking I'd stay ahead of it. That was the last time I went outside that night. By 9, the road in front of my house was completely covered. No plow would come through. I didn't see a single car pass. The wind picked up and the snow started blowing sideways, piling against the fence and the side of the house. Inside was quiet. I had the TV on low, mostly for background noise. It felt mostly like a normal night, but I was just aware that if something went wrong, I wasn't going anywhere. Around 10, I got up to stretch and I noticed something through the front window that stopped me. There were footprints on the walkway. They weren't mine. Mine were wider and messy from shoveling earlier. These were narrow and straight, coming from the street toward my porch. The snow had already started filling them, but they were still clear enough to follow. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to work it through logically. Maybe somebody walked by earlier before it got bad. Maybe they cut across my yard. None of that really lined up, but I didn't jump straight to panic either. I locked the front door. It was already locked, but I checked it anyway. Then I checked the back door. Same thing. I went back to the living room and sat down, telling myself I was overthinking it. About 15 minutes later, I heard someone knocking at my front door. I froze. The TV was still on, and I remember reaching for the remote and muting it without looking at the screen. Another knock followed, a little bit louder this time. I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at the door, listening to the wind outside, and the faint hiss of snow hitting the windows. Then a voice came through the door. "Amazon." That was it. No greeting, just the word. My first thought was that it didn't make sense. It was late, the roads were horrible, and I wasn't expecting anything. But I also knew Amazon drivers sometimes worked late, especially around the holidays. I stood up but I didn't go to the door. I stayed back near the hallway. "I didn't order anything," I said. There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe whoever it was had already left. Then, "I have a package for this address. I need a signature before I leave." I asked him who it was for. Another awkward pause. "Amazon," he said, again, like that answered it at all. That's when I noticed how quiet it was outside. The wind had died down for a moment and the snow was falling straight down. It was so silent I could hear my own ears ringing. "Hey, we're good. We didn't order anything and I'm not opening the door," I said. That's when everything changed. He slammed his fist against the door so hard the whole frame rattled. "Open the door," he yelled. I jumped back without thinking. My heart was hammering and I felt like I just took a shot of pure adrenaline. I said, "I'm not opening it," I yelled back. There was a few more seconds of silence and then he started screaming. Not yelling, like pure screaming. Loud, raw, angry sounds that didn't sound planned. He shouted threats that didn't fully make sense, switching between insults and promises that he'd break the door down and drag me out. He kept repeating that he knew I was inside, but he could still hear me moving. I backed down the hallway, my phone in my hands, not really sure what to do or even say. I remember thinking that if someone a few houses down heard anything, it would probably be hard to hear through the storm. He started pounding on the door again, harder this time. I could hear something scraping, like he was kicking at the bottom or dragging something against it. I thought about the fact that my front door was old. I yelled that I was calling the police, and that's when he completely lost it. He screamed louder than before, voice cracking, threatening things I won't repeat. He sounded close to the door, like his face was right up against it. I could kind of hear his breathing between words. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stood there for quite a time, not moving, listening to the house in the storm, my ears still ringing. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to look through the window next to the door. The porch was empty. Snow had already started piling where he must have been standing. I didn't sleep much that night. Kept all the lights on and stayed in the living room. Every time the wind hit the house, I felt like he was there again. In the morning, the storm had buried everything. The footprints were gone. The porch was covered. There were no marks on the door, no dents, nothing I could point to and say this happened. But I know it did, because ever since then, past few times when I got someone knocking on my door, especially late at night, I don't even get up from the couch or make a peep. I just sit there and wait for them to leave.
This happened on Black Friday in 2008. At the time, I was a few years out of college and was working my first real job. I finally had a little bit of money in my bank account, and I was excited to go Black Friday shopping. In particular, I wanted to go to Best Buy, which was the best place to get electronics back then. They were having a really big sale. It was like pretty much everything was on sale and had a big discount. I had gone Black Friday shopping in the past and always enjoyed it, but on this year, I took it more serious. Most of my electronics were really old, and I had them since college or even high school. Some of my stuff was even from the 90s, so I was planning to get a ton of new things. A TV, new laptop, maybe an iPod, which were a newer thing back then. My best friend Riley, who I had known since we were kids, was kind of in the same situation as me. Riley had recently got a new apartment as well, so we were going to go shopping together. We planned to actually camp outside of Best Buy to try to be one of the first people for the sale. I had remembered years previous that people had done this, and I always thought that they were crazy, but now it seemed like it might be fun. On Thanksgiving night, I met up with Riley and we headed to the Best Buy. I believe that they opened at 5 a.m. the next morning, so it wouldn't be too long of a night. But it was fairly cold out with it being late November. We bundled up and I had brought a tent and sleeping bags as well. When we got to the Best Buy, there were a few people already there. I saw a few other tents and people sitting in chairs they had brought and stuff. One guy brought a TV and a portable generator or something, and several people were watching it. Riley and I were maybe the 30th people or so to get there, and people continued to arrive after us. We got in line and it was maybe 7 p.m., so we had about 10 hours to go. Quickly, the line got longer behind us. There was a fence divider on the sidewalk out front of the store, so the line was pretty organized. For the first few hours, Riley and I talked with each other, as well as some of the people around us. We got to know them a little bit, and talked about the things that we were excited to buy. Most of the people seemed pretty nice. By about 10 p.m., we were getting cold and tired. We decided to try to get some sleep, so we got inside the tent and in our sleeping bags. Some other people nearby went in their tents as well, and things got pretty quiet. Surprisingly, I fell asleep pretty quick. I'd been worried that I wouldn't be able to get any sleep at all. However, at some point in the night, I was awoken. At first, I was a little dazed and confused, but I quickly remembered where I was and why I was in a tent. Then I heard the sound of the tent being unzipped. I did not know why this was happening. I looked over and Riley was still in the tent and was sleeping. Then I saw right in front of me the tent start to open. This creepy guy started looking in. He was looking right at me and had a gross-looking beard and messy hair. It really freaked me out. He stopped and then was just staring at me. After a few seconds, I was finally able to speak. I asked him who he was. He said nothing, but just kept staring at me. It was really weird. I sat up and the guy quickly closed the tent and moved away. I was glad that he was gone. I reached over and opened the tent and looked outside. I couldn't see him anywhere. He must have walked away. So I closed the tent and then tried to fall back asleep. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. We had our alarm set for 4, which was an hour before the store opened. I thought that maybe the guy was trying to cut the line, because we had seen the people around us and he wasn't one of them. I had no idea where he had come from. I was somehow able to fall back asleep and then woke up at 4 to our alarm. Riley and I both got up, packed up the tent, and then waited the final hour. It was crazy to leave the tent and now see more people around. And in the final hour, a bunch more cars entered the parking lot, and the line got even longer. There was now a huge crowd outside. I talked to Riley about the guy in the tent. We both just laughed it off, even though I had been really creeped out in the moment, and I was still kind of creeped out thinking back to it. I looked around and didn't see the guy anywhere. I knew that I would remember that face. I couldn't get it out of my head, it was so creepy. At last, the store opened. Everybody rushed inside, but it wasn't that crazy, things were pretty civilized. There was no pushing or shoving or anything, at least not that I saw. Riley and I quickly made our way to the items that we wanted. Before we knew it, the store became extremely busy. Between employees, security people, and mostly customers, it was packed. We walked around, getting the things that we wanted. After being inside the store for maybe 20 minutes, I saw him. The same guy who I had seen at the tent. He was kind of far away, but I knew that it was him. I pointed him out to Riley, and we talked about what happened again. The man was near the front of the store, and he didn't really seem to be looking at anything. He was just kind of standing there and looking around. Then he looked over, and we made eye contact with him. I quickly looked away, and Riley and I moved. We shopped around a little bit more, and we both got pretty much everything that we wanted to, and then some. Then we went to the front of the store and checked out. When we were waiting in line to check out, I looked for the man again, but did not see him. I was glad that I didn't see him anymore. He very well could have still been there because the store was still packed, but I didn't see him, and so I didn't really care. After we checked out, we left, and then we actually went to Target and Walmart for fun. Those stores were both really busy, and I don't really remember if we got anything or not, but I just remember that we went there. We then went to a local mall for a little while before going home. I dropped Riley off, and then I went back to my apartment. I was tired from getting only a few hours of sleep in a tent, and I took a nice nap. Then I got up and started setting up some of my electronics. Now, that night I was up in my apartment just relaxing. I was watching my new TV and setting up my new computer. Obviously it was Friday, so I had no work the following day. Plus I had taken a nap, so I was up late. At a little after midnight, I remember that I noticed something out of the corner of my eye from the window. My apartment was on the second floor of the building. I remember that it looked out to the parking lot. At this time of night, it would be very quiet. However, I had seen someone walking. For whatever reason, I noticed. I looked over, and there he was again, that same guy. The man who had opened our tent, and the man who I had seen in Best Buy. He was just standing in the parking lot and staring up at me. It sent a chill down my spine. I instantly got up and closed all the blinds and covered all the windows. I was so creeped out that I was too scared to look out of them again. I had lived in that apartment for multiple years and had never seen the guy. I didn't think that he lived there. After a while, I looked again. He was gone. The guy was nowhere in sight, and I was afraid that he might be in the building. My doors were locked, but luckily nothing else happened. I never saw him again after that or anything. I still don't know how or why he went to my apartment. It was the craziest thing. I will never forget that creepy man's stare.
I was living alone that winter. This was about 3 years ago, early December, right before the holidays. I'd been working late a lot, so when a snowstorm rolled in that night, I figured I'd just stay home, make something simple for dinner, and catch up on some stuff around the house. My neighborhood was dead quiet. Most of the houses were older families or retired people who didn't go out much in the winter. Around 9 p.m., I walked into the living room and noticed a truck's headlights moving slowly down my street. At first, I assumed it was a snowplow, but as it got closer, I realized that it was just a regular pickup with a cheap-looking plow attachment on the front. Nothing official. No markings, no lights on top. Just an older white truck with a dented bumper. He drove past my house slowly enough that I thought he was lost or checking an address, but I didn't think much of it. He looped back around maybe 10 minutes later. This time he drove even slower, practically crawling past my house. And when he reached the edge of my driveway, he stopped for a split second, like he was looking at it. Or at me. I shut the blinds. I still wasn't freaked out at this point, just annoyed because I assumed it was some neighbor's buddy trying to make a few extra bucks plowing driveways. About 20 minutes went by. Then the knocking started. Just a soft, almost polite knock at my front door, barely audible over the wind. I froze because nobody knocks on my door that late unless something is wrong. I walked to the peephole and nobody was there. Weird, I thought, but I let it go. But not much later, the knocking came again, this time from the window next to the door. A few quick taps. I opened the blinds a tiny bit, expecting to see somebody standing right there, but there was nothing. Just my porch covered in fresh snow and the storm blowing sideways across my yard. I stepped back, feeling my chest tighten a bit. I went back to doing the dishes, admittedly getting a little annoyed now, thinking either some dumb kids are playing a prank or the worst case scenario, which would be everybody's worst nightmare. Basically an unhinged crazy serial killer playing with its food. I'm quite the thinker, so my mind was messing with me. But I wasn't taking it too serious at this point either. Then another knock. This time at the back door. Only 15 feet or so from where I was in the kitchen. I grabbed the biggest knife I owned and slowly made my way toward the back door. I didn't see anyone. Again, nothing at all. All I saw were fresh footprints leading up to the door and then stopping. No footprints going away. No trail. Just a single set right up to the glass. I felt my entire body tense up. I went around turning off lights, trying to make it look like I wasn't home. Not that it mattered because it was obvious somebody knew I was. Minutes later came another knock. This one came from the side window near the dining room. Same strength and same rhythm. I was thoroughly creeped out now, I'll admit. It's at the point where it's not funny anymore, even if you're a dumb kid looking for a reaction. I had a horrible gut feeling but wasn't sure what to do after checking the window and nobody was there. I swear on my life, I saw the corner of somebody's coat disappear behind the edge of my house, but it was so quick I couldn't give details. At that point I wanted to call the police, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, especially if it was just some drunk guy or a confused neighbor. So I waited it out for another hour. No more knocks, no truck, and no movement outside. Eventually everything got quiet again. It was close to midnight, so I figured I'd go downstairs and play some games or watch some videos until I got tired. My basement was just recently finished and cozy and my favorite place to decompress, with a sliding glass door that opened out to the backyard. I sat down on my PC, got zoned out, and forgot all about the weird knocking for a bit. About an hour later, I got this sudden awful feeling, like something was right behind me, and I got an intense feeling to turn around. I turned around in my chair slowly. Through the reflection of my PC monitor, I almost instantly saw a silhouette standing at the sliding glass door outside. Just a complete dark outline of a person, standing completely still and facing me. My stomach dropped. I whipped around and for a split second, I saw the outline a bit clearly. A man wearing a heavy coat and a hood pulled tight over his head. But before my eyes adjusted, he stepped out of view. I didn't even think. I called the police immediately. While the dispatcher was asking what was happening, I heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against metal upstairs. My front door lock. He was trying to pick or open it. I whispered to the dispatcher that somebody was breaking in. She told me to get somewhere safe, but before I could even reply again, I heard my front door creak open from upstairs. I started backing up toward the basement stairs, but I dropped my phone. I heard the man laughing and screaming with his pounding footsteps getting closer to the stairway. I was panicking so bad I didn't even try to go for my phone. I put my big boots on that I used to wear when I went ice fishing or for deep snow. Luckily I brought them downstairs with me after shoveling my walkway that night. Put my coat on and booked it out of the sliding glass door. I looked around and when I saw the coast was clear, I ran like a bat out of hell. No chance I was going to stay to fight whoever this was. I didn't even have my keys. I just sprinted across the yard, slipping once or twice until I reached the neighbor's house. They let me in after I banged on their door like a madman. I used their phone to call the police. I waited with them until the officers showed up and went to confront whoever was in my house, except, of course, he was gone. They searched the whole place and eventually let me come back over. When I walked in, I felt sick. My house was trashed. Not burglarized, but utterly destroyed. Every cabinet ripped open. My couch was slashed. Kitchen drawers dumped out. My bedroom mattress flipped. Clothes scattered everywhere. My computer was even knocked over, and my phone was found smashed in the basement. Nothing missing, just pure vandalism. Like this guy had a pure rage moment on me and took it out on my house, or something, I don't know. On the big whiteboard I kept in the living room for planning work stuff, the weirdo had written, and I quote, "I'll be back. Sleep tight," with a smiley face. The cops told me I shouldn't stay there that night. No shit, I thought. I went to a friend's place and I didn't sleep more than 20 minutes that night. The next morning I talked to my landlord and told him I wanted out of the lease immediately, and I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't staying another night. He agreed after the cops explained everything. They told me they found footprints in the snow circling my house several times. Same tread pattern as the ones near the sliding door. Same pattern at all 3 entrances he knocked on. They never found the man. The truck never came back, and I was all moved out within a week. I still don't know why he chose my house or what he wanted, but the thing that messed with me the most wasn't the knocking or the fact that he was practically a shadow when I saw him. It was realizing how long he must have been watching me that night, learning the layout of my house, knowing exactly when to knock, knowing when I was distracted, and knowing when to come inside. I haven't lived alone since, and I don't know if I'll want to for a long time, if ever. I moved into this house because it was cheap and quiet. It sits at the edge of a small town, the last one on a dead-end street. Backyard is decently sized, then there's a rough line of trees, and behind that, it's just woods. When I signed the lease in summer, that felt peaceful. In the winter, it felt like the world stopped right at that tree line. This all happened last January, during a stretch where it snowed almost every day. I worked from home, so I'd go on 3 or 4 days without really leaving the house. My schedule was just wake up, work, eat, stare at a screen, and sleep. The first time I saw the light, I wasn't even thinking about the woods. Out in the trees, a small glow flickered again, low and steady. It wasn't a car or anything reflecting off the snow. It looked almost like somebody had set off a little lantern down in the woods and walked away from it. It didn't move an inch. I watched it for maybe a full minute, waiting for some normal explanation to appear. A person walking, a car backing up, another light, nothing. Eventually, it went out in this soft way, like somebody put something over it. I stared at the spot for another minute, then told myself it was probably some hunter or a neighbor's kid messing around. The next morning I checked. The snow in my yard was smooth except for a single set of boot prints. They came out of the trees off to the left, cut across the back of the yard, followed my fence line for a while, then curved and disappeared back into the woods on the right side. No prints straight to the house. No clusters by the door. Just a big lazy arc around my backyard, like somebody walked the edge, looked around and left. It bothered me, but not enough to freak out. I decided whoever it was must have been passing through and picked a weird route. I don't know, people do weird stuff. I went back inside and tried to drop it. 2 nights later, the light came back. I was in the living room this time, laptop open, TV off. My blinds were half open on the sliding door. I saw the glow in the glass before I saw it outside. Same spot, more or less. Maybe a little bit more centered behind my house. A single small light between the trunks. No flares, no movement. Just there. This time it felt intentional. I stood by the glass and watched it a bit longer than I probably should have. While I was just standing there, it started to drift. Not toward the house, but parallel to it, sliding slowly behind the trees like whoever had it was walking a line. Then it stopped again. That's when I got that stiff, tight feeling in my chest that says, this is not right, even if you can't explain why. I didn't go outside. I locked the back door again and shut all the blinds and pretended that made any difference. The next morning, I went straight out back. More footprints. Same tread pattern. Same size by the look of it. They came out of the woods closer to the middle this time, walked in a straight line toward the yard, and then paced. Not random wandering, a straight back and forth track near the middle of the yard. Somebody had walked one line over and over again. Then a curve that cut toward the fence and back into the trees. A worn down strip of snow in the center of my yard for no good reason. That's when I stopped telling myself it was nothing. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. Not every night, but most. I'd see that glow in the trees sometime after 11, some nights further back, some nights closer. Always in a slightly different place, never exactly the same as before. Then the next morning, new footprints. Sometimes they'd skim the fence, and sometimes they'd crisscross in weird ways. One day it looked like they'd walked a big rough circle in my yard. Another day it looked like they'd walked to the same patch and stood there long enough to stomp it flat. Still never coming right up to the house, never at the doors. That's what made it weird. It felt like he knew exactly where my line of comfort was and was just standing outside of it. At the end of the week, I was barely sleeping. I kept imagining what he looked like out there. I hadn't seen him yet, just the light, just the tracks, but my brain filled in the blanks. I checked my locks at least 3 times every night. I left the TV on just to have sound inside that wasn't the wind. By the time I cracked, it wasn't fear that pushed me over. It was being tired and pissed off. It was like 3 in the morning, closer to dawn than midnight. I'd finally drifted off on the couch when a faint glow on the ceiling woke me up. The light was back, leaking through the slats of my blinds. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart pound. Then I got mad. I put my boots on over my pajamas, grabbed my heavy coat and the bright flashlight I keep by the front door, and walked straight out of the back without thinking too hard about it. If I stopped to think, I'd probably talk myself out of it. The cold hit like a slap. The air burned my nose, and the snow came up to almost my calves. The little light in the woods looked smaller now that I was outside, but somehow more real. I walked across my yard, following my own old tracks until they ran out. After that, I headed straight toward the glow, leaving a new set of tracks behind me. The closer I got to the trees, the quieter everything felt. The wind dropped. The sound from the road faded. It was just crunch after crunch. When I reached the tree line, I hesitated for half a second. Then I stepped in. The snow was patchy under the branches. I could see clearer now. The light wasn't a lantern hanging. It was a small campfire. Pathetic, really. Low flames and more embers than anything. Next to it, sitting on a log, was a man. He had a winter hat, his hood up, and a heavy coat, thick snow pants and gloves. His hands were out over the fire. His head turned slowly when my flashlight hit him, like this was the most normal thing in the world. We stared at each other. "You're on my property," I said. My voice came out way shakier than I wanted it to. He blinked once. His eyes looked dull, like he hadn't really slept in a long time. "Didn't know you were going to come out," he said, like I'd walked into his living room. "Yeah, well, you've been out here for days," I said. "People don't camp behind someone's house without saying anything, you know." He didn't apologize and didn't explain. "I like the trees," he said simply. "Good cover." The way he said cover made something in my stomach twist. My flashlight moved off of him and swept the little clearing. There was a tarp half tied between two trees behind him, acting like a windbreak, a plastic crate, a cheap sleeping bag, and a metal pot. It looked like he'd been out there a while, but he also could have packed up in 30 seconds if he wanted to. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. He shrugged. "A bit." "Look, you can't just stay here," I said. "If you need help, I can call someone. Shelter, I don't know, but you can't sit out here staring at my house all night." The words came out before I thought about what I was admitting, that I knew he'd been watching. That's the first time he really smiled. Small and quick, but it was real. "I wasn't staring," he said. "Just watching patterns." "Patterns of what?" He looked past me, toward my house to the trees. Lights, curtains, when you move around, all that. He said it casually, like he was talking about the weather. I took a step back without meaning to. "Hey man, I'm calling the cops if you're still out here tomorrow," I said. He said, "Okay." Didn't say try it, he just let the smile fade and turned his attention back to the fire, like I was boring him down. I left before my nerves gave out, walking faster than I meant to back to my yard. By the time I reached my porch and looked back, the trees were just dark shapes and the little flame was barely visible. Inside, my hand shook so hard it took 2 tries to lock the door. I told myself I'd done something about it and that he'd be gone by the morning. The idea of trying to explain that conversation to a cop made my skin crawl. "He likes watching my curtains" isn't a sentence I wanted to say out loud to another person yet. When I woke up, there was no light. I checked the woods first. No glow and no movement. The clearing looked dark from my yard. For a second, I thought maybe he had packed up and left in the night, and that would be the end of it. But it felt wrong that he'd leave before I followed through on the "I'll call someone" part, like he'd predicted my bluff. I went back out there. His camp looked exactly the same from a distance. When I stepped into the clearing, I realized what was off. He was gone, but his stuff wasn't. The fire pit was full of blackened ash, still faintly warm under the top crust when I touched it with my boot. The tarp still hung. The sleeping bag was rolled but left behind, and the crate sat where it had been. Everything looked like he'd left in a hurry or planned to come back. I should have called the cops right then, but instead I started looking. Inside the crate were papers and photographs. The photos were cheap prints, glossy but already warping from being damp. The top one was of my house, back view and sliding door. The angle was from the tree line, from about where I was standing actually. Under it were more. My house from different angles, daytime, nighttime. The front door, the side window. The kitchen window with me standing in plain view. One where I was on the back porch, hood up and looking at my phone. Somewhere zoomed in prints of my windows at night. In a few, you could clearly see me at my desk, my head bent toward the screen. Under the photos were loose notebook pages. He'd ripped them out of different notebooks, different colors of lines, different margins. They were full of cramped handwriting. Arrives home usually at 5 to 6. Lights off by 1 most nights. Watches TV in the living room, sometimes falls asleep there. Sits alone and eats at the counter. On one page at the top, he'd written my address. Under it said, "Back is good. Trees close. No dog. No close neighbor windows." I don't remember when I pulled my phone out, but I know I was already talking when I realized my hands were shaking again. The dispatcher immediately took me serious when I said, "There's a camp in my woods behind my house, and it's full of pictures of me." 2 officers met me in the yard and I walked them out there. They put gloves on and started going through everything. Besides the photos and notes, there was a backpack with clothes, a worn-out ski mask, a big hunting knife in a sheath, and a smaller bag containing a handful of syringes and little plastic baggies with some kind of powdery stuff in them. The other officer called me over to a notebook he'd found shoved into a crack in a tree. It was duct tape along the spine and filthy. He opened it midway. At the top of the page he'd written, "Lives alone. Good. Underlined twice." Underneath, in the same cramped handwriting, keeps to himself. Good view from the tree line. Schedule predictable. No visitors after dark. Lower down, started noticing me. Comes to the window more often. Tension up. The last line on that page, written darker, was, came out tonight. Stood close. Nervous but brave. It's time to move on. Leave gear and loop back later. The date was the night I confronted him. They searched the woods for a while after that. They found another small clearing further in with an older fire pit, some trash frozen in the snow, and some more footprints heading toward a service road. No sign of him. A detective even came out and asked me a bunch of questions and took the notebook, the photos, the drugs, and the knife. There wasn't much else they could do at this point in time and promised to increase patrols. A week later, I got a short update though. Some of the other addresses in that notebook matched break-in reports in a town about an hour away. A couple matched calls about a suspicious person watching the house from last winter. They still hadn't found him. I still think about that last line sometimes. Time to move on, leave gear and loop back later. I was just one of several. Leaving all that stuff behind wasn't panic, it was a plan. And somewhere in some other patch of woods, there's probably another little campfire burning behind someone else's house and another stack of photos curling in the cold. The storm hit overnight, and by the time I woke up, the whole street was dead. No lights anywhere, not even the houses on the main road. My generator had kicked on sometime before I got out of bed, so I didn't even realize there was an outage until I looked outside. Everyone else's house was dark. Mine was the only one with any sort of power or life dwelling out of it. It made me feel a little bit guilty for some reason. Like I was somehow cheating them out. I don't know, I'm weird. LOL. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when I heard a knock. I thought it might be one of my neighbors checking if they could put food in my fridge or something. That's happened before. When I opened the door, I recognized the man standing there, but only barely. He lived farther down the street, or at least I thought he did. I'd only ever seen him getting out of his car with his two kids. Always quick waves and no conversations. Both kids were with him now. They looked cold. The boy kept rubbing his sleeves like he was trying to warm his hands inside the coat. The girl's nose was bright red. "Hey," the man said, giving this apologetic half smile. "So, sorry to bother you. Our heat's out. Been getting colder by the minute since last night. The house is unbelievably freezing. Saw you had power and thought maybe we could warm up here. Just for a bit. I'd be happy to give you some cash for the inconvenience," he said. This was hands down the weirdest encounter I'd ever had in my entire life already, but I felt like I had no choice but to help. I felt that instinctive pressure to say yes before I even fully processed what he was asking. The kids looked miserable, and he kept glancing over his shoulder toward the road like he didn't want to stand outside too long. "Yeah, it's okay," I said. "Come on in. I'll get some hot chocolate going." They stepped inside carefully like they weren't sure if they were supposed to make noise. I told them to put their boots by the mat so they wouldn't track snow everywhere. The kids did it immediately. No complaints and no dragging their feet. Almost too quickly. Seemed like well-behaved kids, I remember thinking. The man introduced himself as Mark. The kids didn't say their names. He said them for them. "This is Lucas and Maya," he said, patting their shoulders. I gave them all blankets and turned the TV on low. The kids sat on the couch without asking for anything, not even what they were allowed to watch. They kept glancing at him like they needed his approval just to sit. "You live here alone?" Mark asked after a few minutes, looking around the living room. "Yeah," I said, "just me." He nodded in this way that I felt like he'd already guessed that, or asked around. I tried making small talk, mostly because the silence with him standing there felt heavy. He answered everything casually, but vaguely. Where he worked, what brought him here. Just generic answers with nothing specific to follow up on. The kids didn't look up from the TV barely once. A couple of hours passed. The outage updates kept saying, "No estimate available." I told them they could stay until the power came back. He thanked me. A lot, like too much. Every time I said no problem, he'd say something like, "Not everybody would do this," or "We really needed this." And I'd just nod because I didn't know how else to respond. By afternoon, the storm got worse. Thick snow was piling up faster than the plows could deal. The sky looked like one big white blur. I kept checking outside, even though nothing was changing. Something about having strangers in the house made me more aware of all the little sounds. Floor creaks, heater clicks, wind hitting the siding, etc. Around 7, I told him I'd set up sleeping arrangements. Mark could take the guest room, and the kids could sleep together on the couch. He agreed quickly, almost like he didn't want me reconsidering. I went to bed early because I suddenly felt drained. Not physically, just from the social pressure of having people I barely knew in my house. I read for about 20 minutes before the words started blurring. I remember thinking that everything was fine, that I'd made a good decision helping them, but right before I fell asleep, I also remember this small nagging thought. Why didn't the kids ever talk to me? That was about all I remembered before I woke up at around 1 a.m. to a sound in the hallway. At first, I wasn't sure if it was real. I lay there listening. The house made occasional noises like everyone else's house does, but this one was different. Slow, careful, like somebody shifting their way onto a floorboard to test it. Then my door creaked. Not much, just enough that I could see the crack widening. I pushed myself up a little. Hello? The door opened further, and somebody stepped into the room. It was Mark. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, like he was letting me get used to him being there. Are you okay? I finally asked. He blinked slowly, like he had to pull himself out of a thought. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to wake you. I was, hungry. I figured I'd ask you if you mind if I make a sandwich. His voice didn't match the situation at all. He sounded like he was reading lines, and he wasn't smiling, or really making any expression. Yeah, I said after a second. That's fine. He nodded once, backed out, and closed the door quietly. I waited to hear kitchen noises, like footsteps, cabinets, or anything. But nothing. Just the generator outside in the wind. That's when the regret started hitting me. Shouldn't have let them stay. Shouldn't have opened the door in the first place. Every tiny thing I'd brushed off earlier suddenly felt wrong. The way he stood behind the kids, the way they watched him, the way he'd asked if I lived alone, like he was confirming something. I stayed awake after that. My heart wouldn't slow down. I tried reading again just to distract myself, but I kept glancing at the door every few seconds. At some point I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to someone breathing above me, right next to the bed. I opened my eyes and there was a figure leaning over me, wearing black clothes, gloves, and a mask that covered everything except the eyes. I screamed and tried to shove them away. He grabbed my wrist instantly. It's okay, he whispered. Calm down. It was Mark. Even with the mask, his voice was unmistakable. He pushed down harder when I struggled. I kicked and managed to hit him in the knee. His grip loosened for a second and I rolled sideways off the bed. He grabbed my ankle and yanked me back. I clawed at the floor trying to get traction. Then I heard a small voice from the hallway. Stop hurting her, Lucas screamed, with Maya crying somewhere behind him. We called the police, she said. Mark froze completely. He didn't move for a solid second, like he was computing something. Then he let go and bolted out of the room. I heard the front door slam. The kids kept crying until the sirens showed up. The police got there in record time, like maybe 5 or 6 minutes. They tackled him outside in the snow. He barely resisting them, just muttering something under his breath. Inside, the kid sat on the couch shaking. The girl kept rubbing her hands like she was trying to wipe something off it, and the boy wouldn't look up at all. I kept saying, hey, you're safe now. You're okay. Even though I didn't feel too sure about anything. One of the officers crouched down in front of them and asked how they called. The girl pointed toward the wall phone in the kitchen. I hadn't even thought about it, but the generator had kept that line active. I'm still thankful for that stupid landline. If they hadn't used it, I don't know how long everything would have gone on. Another officer pulled me aside to ask questions. How I knew the man, how long they'd been in the house, and whether anything else happened. I told them everything I could remember. They scribbled notes so fast I couldn't even follow their handwriting. It wasn't until maybe 10 minutes later that one of the officers walked back in from outside. He wasn't panicked, but he wasn't calm either. He looked at the kids first. Can you tell me your names? He asked gently. They hesitated. The boy whispered something too quiet for me to catch. The officer nodded, then stepped away to radio something in. A minute later, he came back over to me and said, Did the man ever tell you he was their father? Yeah, I said, or he implied it. He introduced them like they were his. The officer pressed his lips together like he was trying not to react too strongly. They're not his kids, he said. They fit the description of 2 missing children from out of state. It's been years since anyone has heard of them or seen them. My stomach dropped. Everything inside of me went hollow at once. The girl started crying again when she overheard. By the time they walked him past me in handcuffs, he had snow stuck in his hair and on his sleeves. He didn't look angry or scared, just annoyed, like this was a setback in his long plan, not the end of it. He glanced up at me once. You weren't supposed to wake up, he whispered, quiet but clear. One of the officers shoved him forward before I could even react. But the way he said it, that bored matter-of-fact tone, made everything feel so freaking creepy, like he'd already accepted whatever came next because he'd done this before.
My friend Jake and I ran a YouTube channel about abandoned places and local urban legends. It had just about 15,000 subscribers, but we took it seriously. We were researching places for Halloween content when Jake came across this post about an abandoned riverside cemetery. It sat past a stretch of woods on the edge of town, fenced off with most gates chained. and hadn't been used since the early 90s. We'd heard rumors about illegal burials being why it closed, but nobody could verify that. We went just before sunset on a Saturday in late October. The fence had gaps where kids had torn through the chain link. Jake had his camera out immediately and was filming the crooked headstones and collapsed mausoleums. At first it felt normal. The place had overgrown paths, worn names on stones, and toppled crosses. Jake was doing his usual commentary about the history while I followed with the extra battery pack. The sun dropped fast once we got deeper in. That's when I started noticing things that didn't fit. There were fresh boot prints in the dirt between graves. Multiple treads were all converging near the older section. A camping lantern hung from a low tree branch, and when I touched the metal casing, it was still warm. I told Jake we should wrap it up. He checked his watch and said we had 20 minutes of good light left. He wanted to push further into the older section where the graves were packed closer together. We kept walking when we heard loud screeches along with a faint sound of metal scraping on stone. It would happen for a few seconds, stop, then start again. Jake instantly started whispering about it to the camera and was already moving toward it, while I kept hissing at him to leave. The sound led us to a clearing near a collapsed crypt. Someone had cleared the brush maybe 20 feet across. I could see a stone bench between two graves, but from where we were standing, I couldn't tell if anyone was there. Jake moved ahead of me to get a better angle while I stayed back, trying to see around the crypt's edge. I didn't realize when my foot came down on a branch. As soon as the snap echoed, something let out a sharp screech. Jake flinched hard and stepped back, nearly running into me. That was when I finally got a clear look past the trees. A man was sitting on a stone bench between two graves. He was wearing a wolf mask with gray fur that looked dirty and matted. The eye holes were completely dark, and I couldn't see his face at all. Right next to him, perched on top of a headstone, was a small monkey, maybe a capuchin. It was the one making the noise. The man hadn't moved yet. One of his hands rested on the bench, and his fingers were tapping against the stone. I realized that was the scraping sound we'd been hearing the whole time. Then he turned his head toward us, and I nearly crapped my pants. Within seconds, lights came on from all around us, aimed straight in our direction. They were too bright to see who was holding them. All I could make out were dark shapes standing between the headstones. I hurriedly grabbed Jake's wrists, and we took off, cutting between the graves and trying to retrace our way back. One of the lights stayed on us the entire time, tracking our movement no matter where we turned. The ground was a mess with roots everywhere, uneven dirt, and holes you couldn't see until you were almost on top of them. I jumped over a sunken grave and nearly went down when I landed. Behind us, I could hear people moving through the cemetery. Jake asked where the exit was. I told him I didn't know. Once we started running, everything looked the same. My foot clipped the edge of an open grave, and I went down hard. Jake hauled me back up by my jacket, and we kept moving. Branches slapped across my face and arms as we pushed through the brush. Somewhere behind us, I could hear the monkey screeching again. We hit the fence and started climbing. The chain link rattled under our weight. At the top was barbed wire we hadn't seen coming in. It caught my jeans and tore through as I went over. Jake came after me. We hit the ground on the other side and kept running through the woods. My leg was bleeding, and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. But I didn't stop until we made it to the road. Jake was bent over, hands on his knees, trying to breathe. I turned back toward the tree line. The monkey was still making noise somewhere in there, but the footsteps had stopped. Like whoever was following us got to the fence and just decided to stop. We didn't talk on the walk back to Jake's car. When we got in, he checked his camera. The recording had stopped right before we got to the clearing. He deleted the footage. Then we got back to his place. I asked him why. He said it felt wrong to bring people to that place. Said whoever was in there clearly didn't want to be found. And we got lucky they let us walk out. I couldn't agree more. A few weeks later, I looked up the cemetery online and found this article from 2003 about cops checking out reports of weird activity there at night. I looked up the cemetery online. They didn't find anything. The article said a few people had gone missing in that area over the years, but no bodies turned up in the cemetery. We stopped making videos after that. Deleted the whole channel maybe 3 months later. If anyone asked, we said we lost interest. We never talked about the cemetery. I drive past those woods sometimes on my way to work. The fence is still there. You can still see the gaps in the chain link, but I've never gone back. Because I still think about that guy in the wolf mask just sitting there between the graves, fingers tapping on stone, the monkey on its chain, and ended up deeper in there, instead of finding that fence. I was a freelance journalist covering local government stories that bigger outlets wouldn't touch. It was boring but paid the bills. Last April, my editor at the Valley Register had asked me to document the condition of a lakeside property tied up in ownership disputes since the late 90s. The assessor's office had tried twice to send inspectors, but both times they reported feeling uncomfortable and left without finishing. I figured it was the usual excuse for not wanting to drive 40 minutes into the woods. I got the addresses from the county clerk and headed out on a Thursday afternoon around 2. The house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, hidden from the main road by overgrown pines and thick brush. The gate was rusted open. I parked near the front and started taking exterior shots. It was a 3-story building with a wraparound porch rotted through in places and had paint peeling everywhere. I was walking the perimeter for more photos when I noticed the back door standing partially open. I called out twice, but when I didn't get any answers, I pushed open the door and got in. Inside, the kitchen had dishes stacked by the sink and cabinets hanging open with expired food from the 90s. A calendar on the wall was still turned to May 1997, and old newspapers were scattered everywhere. The first red flag was the dust. It wasn't thick enough for 20-plus years of abandonment. I made a note for it, and I moved through the downstairs taking photos. The living room furniture was covered in yellow sheets. The first bedroom had a made bed with dresser drawers pulled open and empty. The master bedroom had heavy curtains drawn. When I pulled them back, I found the windows boarded over from the inside with fresh lumber that didn't match the rot everywhere else. The closet door's padlock looked new. Deep scratches scored the floor in front of it, like something heavy had been dragged. I should have left then, and I was about to until I stumbled to the basement door off the kitchen hallway. Cold air rolled up when I opened it, carrying the smell of damp concrete and sweet iron. I used my phone's flashlight going down. The basement extended beyond the house's footprint, probably under an old addition. It had stone walls, a concrete floor, and metal shelving along one side with paint cans and tools. The other side had heavy metal hooks embedded in the stone at shoulder height. Restraints with rusted buckles were bolted into the floor, and someone had cut drains into the rusted concrete and installed industrial lighting on a separate electrical system. There was no attempt to hide what the room was for. My hands shook as I raised my phone to take photos. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs and stopped directly above me. Seconds later, the basement door opened. My stomach dropped. I instantly killed the light and frantically searched for a way out. I squinted and spotted a small ground-level window at the far end, half covered by a rotting shutter, barely big enough to squeeze through, but I didn't have options. I moved fast while the footsteps kept getting closer. I reached the window, shoved the shutter aside, and pulled myself up. The glass was already broken. I scraped through, cutting my shoulder on the frame, and dropped into the wet dirt outside. I ran for the tree line, staying low, moving through the woods parallel to the driveway. When I got close enough to see the front, I stopped behind a thick pine. A dark blue pickup was parked next to my car. A man stood between the vehicles, photographing my license plate with his phone. He looked to be in his 40s, heavy built, and had work clothes on. He walked slowly around my car, looking through the windows. Then he leaned against his truck's hood and crossed his arms. He was waiting. I stayed hidden for nearly 20 minutes. My shoulder was bleeding, and legs were cramping, but I didn't move. Finally, he got back in his truck and drove off. I waited 5 more minutes, then ran to my car. My hand shook so bad I could barely start it. I drove out fast, checking the rear view constantly. I didn't stop until I was back in the city. The next morning, I called my editor and said I was too sick to finish the assignment. He wasn't happy but accepted it. An hour later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was just breathing for 5 seconds. Then they hung up. It happened again the next day, the third time. The man said I should be more careful about where I go and what I look at before the line went dead. I filed a police report and gave them everything. The number was traced to a burner phone. They said they'd increase patrols near my apartment, but couldn't do much else. The call stopped after that, but 2 days later, I saw a dark blue pickup parked down the street from my building. It was gone by afternoon, but I knew it was the same one. Maybe I was paranoid, or maybe I was still under the radar. Anyway, I quit 2 weeks later, citing personal reasons, and moved to Portland. A cousin of mine got me an office job that had nothing to do with investigative journalism. 6 months later, I saw a brief article in the Register. The county had condemned the property and seized it through eminent domain. The house was demolished due to structural hazards, and the land was cleared. I never followed up or told anyone about what I saw in that basement, because some stories just aren't meant to be published. Not because they aren't true, but because knowing them comes with a cost that doesn't end when you walk away. I still check my rearview mirror more than I should. Still think about those hooks in the basement wall and the restraints bolted to the floor. Someone had been using that chamber for a purpose I'd never want to know. I'm just glad I never found out who was behind that padlocked closet door. I've been driving 18-wheelers for 6 years, long enough to know when I'm pushing it. And that night, I went past what I should have, even though I kept telling myself I was still fine. I'd taken 2 overnight runs back-to-back for a rush load up to Portland. The company was paying double for it, and I needed the money. By the second night, I was running on gas station coffee and some 4 hours of sleep spread across 2 days. The route took me onto a coastal highway most truckers avoid. The lanes are tight, there's no shoulder in a lot of places, and once you're out there, there aren't many spots to pull over. Normally I wouldn't take it either, but it shaved almost 2 hours off the drive. For the first hour or so, everything was fine. Around 2 in the morning, fog rolled in heavy enough that the road just disappeared in front of me. Around mile marker 37, my eyes started getting heavy. I turned the radio up, cracked the window, and even smacked myself in the face a couple times. That bought me maybe 10 minutes before my eyelids started dropping again. I was thinking about pulling over when a figure in a red hoodie appeared in my lane. I slammed the brakes and yanked the wheel hard to the right. The truck fishtailed. I felt the rear end swing out and the whole rig tipping. My head cracked against the side window, and everything went sideways. When I came to, I was slumped against the steering wheel with the airbag deflated in my lap. Blood was running down from above my right eye. I sat there trying to catch my breath and figure out what had happened. The truck had gone off the road and hit a tree at an angle. I checked my arms and legs. Everything worked, even though my ribs were screaming. I climbed out carefully and looked back at the road, expecting to see whoever I'd swerved to miss. But the road was empty in both directions. I walked around the truck trying to get my head straight. I was exhausted and rattled. After a minute, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But my phone was dead, and the closest town was at least 10 miles back. So, I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and started walking along the road, hoping I'd see headlights or find a house with a light on. The fog was getting thicker. I couldn't stop shaking. That's when I noticed a building set back from the road, maybe 40 yards into the brush, with concrete walls and some kind of antenna tower sticking up behind it. It looked abandoned, but it had a roof, and maybe if I were lucky, there'd be a phone inside that still worked. I walked toward it. The front gate was hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Up close, the place looked like it had been empty for decades. The main door was metal and slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside smelled like wet concrete and rust. My flashlight swept over an old monitoring room with desks and chairs tipped over and papers scattered across the floor. It looked like some kind of relay station. I figured I'd wait there until morning, and then try flagging down a passing truck. Most of the rooms were empty or full of broken equipment, but something felt off. A chair was pulled away from a desk, as if someone had just stood up, and there were drag marks in the dust that looked recent. Toward the back, I noticed a narrow hallway with a faint glow coming from it, like a light was still burning somewhere. I started toward it, thinking maybe someone was actually there. I was about halfway down the hall when the floor gave out, and I dropped straight through rotted boards and landed hard on my side in a pile of broken wood and debris. The impact knocked the air out of me. My flashlight skidded away and came to rest against a concrete wall. I laid there for a minute, trying to breathe. Everything hurt. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the hole I'd fallen through, maybe 8 feet above me. I sat up slowly and took stock. It was some kind of lower level, maybe a basement. I crawled over to grab my flashlight when I felt a breath of air against my neck. I spun around and my light caught the edge of a figure sitting in the corner of the room, just outside the reach of my beam. My stomach dropped. He might have felt my eyes on him because he spoke. He said I wasn't supposed to be there. I got to my feet, even though the pain shot through my ribs. On the far side of the room, I'd spotted a doorway that looked like it might lead to stairs. I didn't answer him. I just started moving toward it. My flashlight bounced against the walls. Behind me, I heard ruffles as if he'd just gotten up. Panic shot through, and I bolted for the doorway. It had a narrow metal staircase. I took the steps 2 at a time. My ribs screamed, but I didn't stop. The footsteps got closer behind me. I burst through a door at the top into another hallway. I could see dim light ahead, near what looked like the entrance. I ran straight for it, crashed through the door, and didn't stop until I hit the road. A truck came up from the south about 10 minutes later. I stepped into the lane and waved my arms. He drove me to the nearest town and dropped me at the ER. The doctor said I had 3 bruised ribs, a mild concussion, and needed 6 stitches above my eye. They kept me overnight for observation. 2 days later, the sheriff's department called. They said they found my truck and checked the building I described. It was an old weather monitoring station, and it had been abandoned since the 80s. There was no one inside, and no sign anyone had been there recently. They asked if I'd been drinking. I told them I was just exhausted. That seemed to satisfy them. They shut the file. But I couldn't shut the nightmares that still haunt me every night.
Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a 1-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all of our windows was level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm lying on the sofa and immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes to look out every other window in the house, then walks around the outside looking in the windows. When he comes back from this confusing exploit, I ask him what the heck is going on and why he's being a spaz. "I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up," he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was about 2 p.m. and the number of people out and about around the complex at that time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or somebody passing by, happening to glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Somebody would knock on the door occasionally, and when I went to answer, no one would be there. I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. The window was open. It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of the window, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He did not blink or move, just looked right at me in a way I have never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was lying on the ground outside the apartment or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was messing with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really somebody at the window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I've been experiencing. I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, I, my boyfriend, and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple of times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my couch. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home, then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear a door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom, so you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater, closet, or small storage space. I look to my right and see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back to the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That was going to be a no for me, man. I ran my ass barefoot out the door, into the snow, and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops. When everybody was back to check out the apartment, he was of course gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit, went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. Since I live so far away now, a part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver and didn't answer. I go get the package later. Then they knocked again. And again. The third time it made me feel really uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Somebody was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check on plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked on the day on accident. Never thought of it as a huge deal. Until I came home from the store 2 days ago and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt could only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assumed somebody robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister. I called my current new boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched. Nothing stolen. Somebody was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside. I told my boyfriend about my stalker and he is not taking this lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras. He put Nest cameras up all over the place and we are on high alert.
This happened many years ago now, but it's something that I will never forget. It was in the early 2000s, and at the time, I was a young single mother with 2 sons aged 7 and 4. There was a new video game system that my sons had been talking about all year, mainly my older son. I was planning to get it for them for Christmas, but I didn't have a whole lot of money to spend. For Black Friday, the local Walmart was having a huge sale, and the video game system was one of the things that was on sale. I knew that it was a great opportunity for me to buy it, and I made plans to go to Walmart. So for Thanksgiving, we stayed at my parents' house, and that allowed me to get up early and go shopping by myself the next day. Walmart opened at 6 a.m. that year on Black Friday, I believe, so I got up before the crack of dawn and drove there. When I arrived, the store had not opened yet, and it was still completely dark outside. However, the parking lot was packed, and I had to park sort of at the back of it. There were people lined up outside the store and walking to the front from the parking lot. I had never seen it like this before. I walked up to the store and got as close as I could, but I was still behind a bunch of people in line. I had only got there about 5 minutes before they opened. Camping out in a tent overnight or something like that wasn't really an option for me. I hoped that I would still have enough time to get the video games, and I felt confident about it. Soon enough, I remember hearing the crowd cheer and the doors opened. I watched countless people run inside the store and inched closer with the people that I was near. About a minute went by before I was able to enter. By the time I got inside the store, there were literally people everywhere. I remember that the electronics department was at the back of the store, so I tried to walk as quick as I could, but there were so many people that it took forever. By the time I made it there, I looked around for the video games. Unfortunately, they were gone. I looked around the electronics department for at least 10 or 20 minutes. I was just hoping that I would find it or that there would be one somewhere, but it seemed as though it had sold out. Finally, there was an employee available to talk to, and he told me that they didn't have any left. I was very disappointed. I decided to try another store to see if maybe they had a similar deal. I hadn't really looked in all the advertisements in the paper the day before because I had been banking on Walmart to work out. I was surprised just how fast the video games sold. So I left the Walmart store and the mob of people. I walked through the parking lot back to my car. However, when I got near it, I saw something strange. There was a guy with a large SUV and the back of it was open. He was standing there selling electronics out of the back of his car. He was parked at the way back of the parking lot, kind of in the corner where there was actually a little bit of space. I saw a couple of people standing around and talking to him, but there wasn't like a crowd or anything. When I realized this, it seemed kind of shady, but I thought that maybe there was a chance he had the video games that I wanted to buy. So I walked over to him. When I approached, I saw mostly other electronics, but I did see a few video games. When I walked up, he told me that he had stuff cheaper than they were selling inside. I asked him if he had any of the video game systems that I was looking for. He looked in the back of his SUV for a moment, which had a lot of stuff in it. There were boxes and wires and all kinds of stuff back there. He told me that he didn't have any with him at the moment, but he said that he did have some back at his shop, which was not far away. Now, the whole thing seemed sketchy, like I said. I didn't think this guy was supposed to be selling stuff, and Walmart would probably shut him down or call the cops on him. But I was angry for missing out after waking up at 6 a.m., so I didn't really care in the moment. I asked the guy where his shop was and what it was called. He said that it was his place, and he said that he would take me there quick. I was surprised to hear that. I thought maybe he would go back there and come back. I said that I could go to my car and just follow him, but he said no. He said that we could go there quick and it was just down the road, and then he would drive me back to Walmart. I told him okay, and then I went around and got into his car. This was a stupid idea to begin with, but at the moment it didn't seem that bad. The man got into the driver's seat and then started driving. He left the Walmart parking lot and turned onto a dark and quiet road. I told the man how crazy it was inside the store and how I really wanted to get the video games for my son. He said that he had several gaming systems and he would sell it to me for cheaper than the sale at Walmart. Aside from it seeming really sketchy, the guy did seem pretty nice. Things then went quiet in the car for the most part. He drove down that road and then turned. It was still dark out and I wasn't quite sure exactly where we were going. After we were driving down that road for at least more than 5 minutes, I started to get nervous. The guy made it sound like his shop wasn't that far away. After driving down the road for a while, he turned again. Then we went down that road for at least another 5 minutes. I no longer knew where we were anymore. I asked the guy how much farther away his place was. He just said that it wasn't much farther. Then he turned on this one road that was even quieter. I was getting a bad feeling that I should not have gotten into the car with the guy. We drove down this really quiet road for at least another 10 minutes. Now we were driving for close to half an hour. At that point, I just wanted to get out of there. Nobody was saying anything. I sensed a change in the guy's overall personality. I was now afraid to say anything. I felt like if I asked again, he would tell me that he was kidnapping me or something. The guy now almost seemed to be angry. We kept driving and came up to a red light. That was just what I wanted to see. It was this quiet intersection and there were really no other cars on the road. The area was more rural here, with woods off in the distance. As soon as the man stopped at the red light, I just grabbed the door handle. Thankfully, it opened. I jumped out of the guy's truck and just ran for it. He did not try to stop me. I went to the right in the intersection and noticed this small little gas station down the road. I saw the man's truck go straight, driving away from me. I went to the gas station and went inside. There I called my parents, who were able to come and get me. When they heard about what happened, they were just glad that I was okay. My parents and I ended up buying the video games for my son together that year at a higher price from another store. So I guess it all worked out, but I'm really glad that I got out of that guy's car when I did. I'm not sure where we were going. I should have never gotten the car to begin with. That guy was already being sketchy for selling stuff out of the back of his car in a Walmart parking lot. This happened back on Thanksgiving night of 2013. This was back when I was 18 years old and living with my parents. We were hosting Thanksgiving at our house, and we lived in a pretty good neighborhood. One thing that was interesting, though, is that we lived less than a mile from a local shopping area. At the end of the neighborhood, there was a busier street, and if you walked down it on the sidewalk, soon that entered an area with a bunch of stores. There was a Target, Walmart, Best Buy, and all that stuff. So this was a year where a lot of stores were actually opening on Thanksgiving night. I didn't have plans to go shopping until maybe the next day on Black Friday. I was really just enjoying Thanksgiving with my family and hanging out watching football and stuff. There was a lot of people at our house, like grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. One of my cousins, Jake, who I'm close with in age, was probably the cousin that I hung out with the most at the time. We talked a lot during that Thanksgiving. I remember that he had the idea to walk down to the store after dinner and see how the shopping was going. At first, I was like, nah, but he said that it would be fun. He told me just how crazy things would get on Black Friday, and he had gone shopping in the past on Black Friday and said that it was fun. So soon, he had convinced me. It sounded interesting to see what the buzz was all about. The plan was to walk there and only be gone for a little while, so Jake and I left at maybe 6:30 or so. We walked down the sidewalk to the local shopping center, which only took about 15 minutes or so. I remember that when we approached, it was crazy. There were cars and people everywhere. Particularly the Target and Walmart were extremely busy. We got there, and at first we were just walking by. One of the first things we noticed was that there was a bunch of cop cars at the Walmart and the lights were flashing. We were obviously curious as to what happened, but also figured we better stay away. So we walked down to the Target and went inside and just walked around for a bit. It was pretty crazy, a lot more so than I would have expected. We didn't get anything, and a short time later we decided to head back. When we left, there were less police cars at the Walmart, but still a few of them. At that point, we walked back home, and were gone for maybe an hour total. After getting back, we just continued hanging out with the rest of the family. We were in the living room watching football and talking and stuff. Around 8 o'clock, some people started leaving. By 9 o'clock, about half the people were there, but still only a few. I remember that it was late in the football game when one of my uncles who was standing by the window said, "There's a guy walking around your backyard." Our backyard was not that big, but fenced in and had several trees and bushes in it. My dad got up and walked over to the window, and I did as well. When we got there, we saw that there was this guy sort of at the back near the fence. He was walking behind a row of trees and heading towards the back corner. It looked suspicious right away, as none of us knew him. He was wearing jeans, a gray sweatshirt with the hood concealing most of his head, and he also had a backpack strung over his shoulder. I thought that maybe he was going to go out of our yard and then into the neighbor's backyard, but instead he turned and started walking towards our house. He was just barely within our view, and he did not look at us, so I don't think he noticed us at the window. He kept walking, and soon we couldn't see him anymore. He was over towards the other end of the house, so we moved over there. My dad decided to go into the backyard and tell the guy to leave, so he went over to the door and opened it. He walked out and looked around, and I went outside behind him. I heard someone quickly moving away from the backyard towards the other side of the house. I heard the leaves on the ground moving, but we didn't see the guy as that part was out of view. He seemed to go around to the side of the house towards the front and was probably leaving. My dad yelled for whoever he was to get out of our yard. We stopped hearing the guy, so we walked around to that side of the house. We still didn't see anything, and we didn't see the guy walking off into other people's yards or down the street either. It was strange, but we figured that he was gone, and we went back inside the house. It was probably like 20 minutes later, there was a knock on our front door. There was a police officer there. He asked us if we had heard anything strange or unusual. We immediately told him about the man. The officer said that he would look around, and within minutes we saw another police car get there. Then they found the same guy who we had seen still hiding in our yard. The guy was next to the house behind a bush. They arrested him, and it turned out that he had never left, even though we thought he did. The man had robbed the Walmart on Black Friday and assaulted 2 people. That's why we saw all the cop cars there. He fled the scene and ran all the way to our neighborhood and ultimately to our yard. I'm glad that the cops looked there. We had no idea that he was still in our yard. We thought that he had left, when in reality, he just hid out of our sight.
I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbor who I will be calling Kay to respect her privacy. Because I don't want to call her crazy or anything else that contributes to the stigmatization of severe mental illness. This story isn't going to be exaggerated to be more creepy or anything like that. It's just what happened. We had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We googled the numbers of the pills to find most of them were antidepressants, but I cannot remember the exact names as this was about a year or so ago. But I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we found unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house this was coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbors building their new house there, but it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine on the corner. Between our house and hers are 2 empty lots. The lot closest to us, with a new house being built there. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what it's about, but apparently it's about nonsense things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard. Sometimes she would walk onto the lot to yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies, and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew of her and were afraid of her. Up to this point, I had never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I'm an only child, too. I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I peek outside the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbors, but my parents had. So my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door. My new neighbors. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. After a few minutes, the blonde lady walks away, and then a couple comes out of the unfinished house, and they get into their car parked on the street. I'm really confused at this point, especially when the man walks over to my door and rings the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted to not answer the door, which was kind of stupid, I know. My parents weren't home anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walks back to his car, and from the window, I can see he's sitting there on the driver's side, doing something. He comes back with a note that he leaves on my door, and then he and his wife drive away. After I'm sure they are gone, I get the note and read it. Apparently, my neighbors were checking out the house when they saw Kay, the blonde lady, attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was. In a rush, I sent a pic of the note to my mom, called my mom, etc. She didn't seem that worried about it, but I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple times, she was rummaging around our flower beds too. There was one instance that really unnerved my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. Another neighbor who lives across the alleyway from us contacted my parents to let them know they had been seeing Kay looming around their back fence gate at around 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbors were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing we had someone essentially casing out our house in the middle of the night was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I'm naming Jay, somehow got in contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everybody was wanting answers to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. I think he was friends with a realtor who sold the house to Kay, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Jay was able to give us a lot of information about Kay. Apparently, her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the US. I'm not naming it, again for her privacy, and her family had essentially placed her in this house away from the rest of them. They did not want to deal with her mental illness, but more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she's been unstable ever since. The reason why she wants to get into our backyard and keeps throwing stuff over the fence is because she believes her son is there. Not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage or his ghost is here or what, but that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she's stopped taking her medication because she's throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January 2020, when, during one of her usual arguments with construction workers, she pulled out a BB gun. She was already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she just threatened to shoot them or actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with big guns. I am thankful that my parents had been following police reports, so when they came, they knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I am both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis. I still have ring camera videos of the police officers with big rifles loitering around our front lawn while assessing the situation. I might post that for proof, but I'm not sure it's necessary. Anyway, after that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We hear she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behavior she used to. Almost every day, I and my parents see her walk her dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her.
The quarry was one of those places everyone knew about, but nobody actually went to. It sat at the end of a logging road about 30 minutes outside town, hidden behind state forest land and a bunch of no trespassing signs that had been there so long they were faded and full of bullet holes. We'd heard about it from some seniors who said the cliffs were perfect for jumping, and the water was deep enough that you wouldn't hit the bottom. Marcus had been talking about checking it out all summer, and by late August, we'd run out of reasons not to go. We left around 2 on a Saturday afternoon in Marcus's Honda. The logging road was worse than we expected. It was full of deep ruts and loose gravel that made the car bottom out twice. We passed a few faded signs warning about blasting zones and private property, but nothing that looked recent enough to make us turn around. The quarry itself was bigger than the satellite images suggested. Sheer rock walls dropped maybe 40 feet down to dark green water that looked calm. There were lower ledges you could climb down to, and the whole place had that abandoned feel that made it seem like we had it to ourselves. Dylan jumped first from one of the lower ledges, then Marcus and Caleb followed. I went last because I'm not great with heights. The cold hit me harder than I expected when I surfaced, but it was fun. We climbed back up and tried a higher spot, taking turns while Marcus filmed everything on his phone. Around 4, we noticed a white pickup truck on the access road above us. It sat there with the engine running for maybe 2 minutes, then drove off without anyone getting out. Dylan said it was probably just someone turning around. Caleb said it felt off and that we should probably leave. But Marcus wanted to do one more jump before heading out. So we agreed. We were walking along the upward path when a rock about the size of a softball hit the water near where we'd been standing seconds before. Caleb jumped and Marcus yelled up toward the tree line, asking who it was. The response was another rock aimed at Dylan's feet. He jumped back and nearly fell off. He shouted we weren't doing anything wrong and asked them to come out. They answered with another rock, hitting close enough that pieces of shattered stone sprayed against our legs. Caleb yelped, raised his hands, and insisted we were leaving. But whoever was up there didn't care. A rock landed right in front of him, then another just past Marcus. We hurriedly grabbed our stuff and started toward the path that led back to the access road, but rocks kept coming. One narrowly missed Dylan, another whooshed past my car. The throws were hurled to block certain routes and steer us away from the main path. Whoever was up there knew the terrain well and was controlling where we went. We cut sideways toward the tree line instead, scrambling through thick brush. Marcus was behind me, and I heard him swear as a rock skipped past his elbow, close enough that I heard it whistle through the air. I could hear movement in the woods paralleling us. Branches were snapping as footsteps kept pace but stayed just out of sight. Dylan tripped over a root and went down hard. I grabbed his arm to help him up, and right then, a rock hit the tree next to us at head height, exactly where we'd been standing a second earlier. The bark exploded outward. I felt pieces hit my face, and one cut my cheek deep enough that I tasted blood. We ran after that. Didn't care about the noise of the branches whipping our arms and faces. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd throw up. We didn't stop until we hit the access road. Marcus's car was maybe 50 yards down. We sprinted for it, but a white pickup rolled back up the road from the opposite direction and stopped about 20 feet from Marcus's car, blocking our path. The man inside looked to be in his 30s, with a thick beard. He was wearing a hunting jacket despite the heat. He rolled down his window and just stared at us. The four of us instinctively huddled closer. Caleb was literally shaking beside me. My heart was pounding hard. He mockingly asked if we had a nice swim. Marcus started to answer, but the man cut him off and told us the road back to the highway was that way. Said we probably wanted to get going before it got dark. Said it was easy to get lost out here. He drove past us slowly, tires crunching on gravel. I watched him in the side mirror until he disappeared around the curve. We got back in Marcus's car. Caleb's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't buckle his seatbelt. I pressed a shirt against Dylan's forehead, trying to stop the bleeding. Marcus started the engine and drove out faster than he should have, hitting every rut hard enough that we bounced in our seats. He didn't slow down until we reached the highway. Dylan lied to his family about his injury. Caleb had to take therapy to get it out of his system. Marcus deleted all the footage from his phone that night. He said he didn't want any evidence we'd been there. We never reported it. What would we even say? That someone defended their property after we ignored multiple warning signs? I still think about all the what-ifs and unanswered questions sometimes. We never really found out who was up there or why they did it. We just know if anything had gone slightly differently,